The morning came the way it always did in Copperhead Falls, gray, cold, and unforgiving. Marcus Morrison sat on the porch of his small ranch house, hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone lukewarm an hour ago. The ceramic held heat better than his joints did these days. 62 years had a way of settling into a man's bones, like winter frost, persistent and aching. The sky lightened incrementally, that grudging transition from black to charcoal that promised a sun still hiding behind the Rockies. He'd been awake since foresleep, having abandoned him somewhere around 2 a.m. when the dream started. Always the same ones was, rice paddies and screaming, the smell of napalm mixing with human flesh, Jenkins bleeding out in his arms, 19 years old and crying for his mother. Marcus had been 20 then, just a kid himself, but old enough to watch other kids die. The Vietnam War veteran cap sat on the porch table beside him, faded red with gold stitching. He touched it reflexively the way other men might touch a cross or worry beads. 43 years since he'd come home from Da Nang. 43 years of carrying weight that never got lighter, only redistributed. His hands trembled when he lifted the mug, just slightly, barely perceptible in the dim light, but he felt it. The shake had started 6 months ago. At first, he'd blamed it on too much coffee, not enough sleep, the general wear of age. But it was getting worse. Mornings were particularly bad. By noon, if he stayed busy, the tremors subsided. But here in the quiet hours before dawn, his body betrayed what his mind refused to acknowledge: he was getting old. Not just older. Old. The garage stood 20 feet away, its door open despite the November chill. Inside, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, sat his 1979 Harley-Davidson Shovelhead. He'd bought her the year he founded Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club, Copperhead Falls chapter. 45 years of riding together. She'd outlasted marriages, friendships, entire decades of American history. The bike was more reliable than his own body now. Marcus set down the mug and pushed himself to standing. His left knee protested immediately, a sharp spike of pain that made him pause halfway up. He breathed through it the way the VA doctor had taught him, counting to 5, letting the initial shock pass. Arthritis, the doctor said. Wear and tear. As if Marcus's body were nothing more than an old machine, breaking down parts, wearing out one by one until the whole thing seized up. He walked to the garage with the careful gait of a man who knew his limitations. Each step measured, deliberate. Pride wouldn't let him limp, but caution wouldn't let him pretend he was 30 anymore. The concrete floor was cold even through his boots. Winter had come early this year, and the forecast promised snow by the weekend. The shovelhead gleamed even in low light. He'd spent 45 years keeping her immaculate. Chrome-polished leather, conditioned, every bolt and gasket checked with religious regularity. She was more than transportation. She was proof that some things with enough care and attention could last. That entropy wasn't inevitable. That a man could maintain what he loved if he just worked hard enough. He ran his hand along the fuel tank, feeling the cool metal under his palm. Smooth, flawless. Then he saw it, a small dark spot beneath the engine. He crouched down, knees screaming in protest, and touched the concrete. Oil, fresh enough to be tacky on his fingertips. The leak was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. A gasket failing somewhere in the engine. 10 years ago, he could have torn the whole thing apart and rebuilt it in an afternoon. 5 years ago, it would have taken a day. Now even thinking about the work required made his back ache in anticipation. He straightened slowly, bracing himself against the bike. The tremor in his hand seemed worse down here, or maybe he was just paying more attention to it. He could ask Stone to help with the repair. Stone was good with engines, patient with the finicky work. But asking for help meant admitting he couldn't do it himself anymore. And that admission felt like surrendering something essential. The sound of the front door opening pulled him from his thoughts. Christine appeared in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow from inside the house. She wore his old flannel shirt over her nightgown, arms crossed against the cold. At 60, she'd kept the grace she'd had when they met 38 years ago, though time had softened her features the way water smooths river stones. Her hair, once deep brown, was silver now. She'd stopped dyeing it 5 years ago, said she'd earned every gray hair and wasn't about to hide them. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him with the kind of expression that came from nearly 4 decades of marriage. Not quite worry, not quite annoyance. Somewhere in between the face of a woman who knew her husband too well to be surprised by his habits, but loved him enough to be concerned anyway. Marcus wiped his oily fingers on a rag. The gesture felt defensive somehow, as if he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. Christine stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. The cold made her pull the flannel tighter. Her voice was soft, not quite a whisper. "You've been out here since 5. He glanced at his watch. 6:15. Time moved strangely in the early morning. Couldn't sleep. The dreams again? He nodded. She knew about the dreams. Everyone who'd loved a veteran knew about the dreams. They'd been married 3 years when he finally told her what he saw when he closed his eyes. She'd held him while he cried, the only time in their marriage he'd completely broken down. She never asked for details after that, and he never offered them. Some things were better left in the dark. Christine moved to stand beside him, her presence warm despite the cold. She didn't touch him, didn't try to comfort him physically. She understood that sometimes a man needed space even in proximity. It was one of the thousand small things she'd learned about him over the years, the accumulated knowledge that turned two separate people into something resembling a single entity. She looked at the motorcycle. Oil leak. Small one, gasket probably. Stone could help. I know. But you won't ask. It wasn't a question. Marcus returned the rag to its hook on the wall. His hands were still trembling slightly, though whether from cold or age or something else entirely he couldn't say. Time was a thief, he'd decided years ago. It stole youth, stole ability, stole the certainty that tomorrow would feel the same as yesterday. The worst part wasn't what time took. It was how quietly it took it. You didn't notice until you reached for something that used to be there and found only empty air. Christine's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. The touch was familiar, worn smooth by repetition, but it still carried weight. 62 years old and a woman's hand could still make him feel like maybe everything wasn't falling apart. Her voice carried that particular gentleness she used when she knew he was struggling. Today's the charity event. He'd forgotten. Not completely. The event had been planned for months, involved dozens of people, represented thousands of dollars raised for the children's hospital. But in the pre-dawn gloom, wrestling with oil leaks and trembling hands and dreams of dead teenagers, he'd let it slip from his mind. Christine continued reading his silence correctly. We're supposed to be there by 8 for setup. It's 6:30 now. Time was a thief and it kept stealing. Marcus squeezed her hand, then released it. He needed to shower, needed to get dressed, needed to stop standing in his garage, feeling sorry for himself. Self-pity was indulgent, and indulgence was something he'd given up the same day he'd gotten sober 35 years ago. He followed Christine back into the house, pausing at the door to look back at the shovel head one more time. The bike sat in the garage like a monument to better days. Or maybe like a promise that some things could still be maintained, still be kept running if you just refused to let them die. Inside the house was warm. Too warm, probably. Christine had taken to keeping the thermostat higher as they'd gotten older, and he'd stopped complaining about it. The living room was modest, furnished with pieces they'd accumulated over decades rather than all at once. Nothing matched exactly, but everything fit together in the way long-term relationships did. The couch was worn in the spots where they sat every evening. The coffee table bore water rings from years of forgotten cups. The bookshelf held an odd collection of motorcycle maintenance manuals, Christine's mysteries, and photo albums. Neither of them opened anymore because the memories hurt too much. On the mantel, 2 photographs faced the room. The first showed Christine and Marcus on their wedding day, both impossibly young. She'd been 22, he'd been 24. He'd been home from Vietnam for 3 years, sober for 1, and absolutely certain he didn't deserve someone like her. She'd married him anyway. The second photograph was older. The colors faded in that distinctive way of 1980s film stock. 2 boys, ages 8 and 5, stood on either side of a younger version of Marcus, Michael and Daniel, his sons. Marcus averted his eyes from the second photo the way he always did, but not before the familiar guilt twisted in his chest. 32 years. 32 years since he'd lost them. Not to death, that would have been cleaner, somehow more final. He'd lost them to his own rage and violence, and they were still out there living lives he knew nothing about, carrying scars he'd given them. He moved past the mantel into the hallway, but the image of his sons' faces stayed with him. That was the thing about guilt. It didn't need to be acknowledged to exist. It just sat there, patient, impermanent, waiting for quiet moments to remind you of your failures. The shower helped the hot water, working out some of the stiffness in his muscles. He stood under the spray longer than necessary, letting the heat soak into his bones. Steam filled the bathroom, obscuring the mirror. That was fine. He didn't particularly want to see himself this morning. Didn't want to confront the gray in his beard, the lines around his eyes, the way his face had started to sag in places that used to be firm. When he finally emerged, Christine had laid out his clothes on the bed. Black jeans, a dark button-down shirt, and his leather vest. The vest was his most important possession besides the motorcycle. Hell's Angels colors. The patches told a story to anyone who could read them. President. Copperhead Falls chapter. 45 years. Various commemorative patches from runs and events. And in the center, taking pride of place, a small American flag with Vietnam veteran beneath it. He dressed slowly, his body still protesting the early hour. The vest settled onto his shoulders with familiar weight. He'd worn it so long it had molded to his frame, the leather soft and creased in patterns unique to his body. Putting it on was like putting on identity. Without it, he was just Marcus Morrison, aging veteran with bad knees and trembling hands. With it, he was Blackjack, president of Hell's Angels MC Copperhead Falls chapter. Leader, protector, brother. The name dated back to Vietnam. Blackjack Morrison. He'd earned it in a firefight when he'd saved his squad by taking out a VC machine gun nest with nothing but a combat knife in what their lieutenant had called either the bravest or stupidest display of violence I've ever seen. Marcus suspected it was the latter. Brave implied choice. He'd simply reacted moving before his brain could catch up and tell him it was suicide. Christine was in the kitchen when he came out pouring coffee into a travel mug. She'd changed into jeans and a sweater, practical clothes for a day of setup and coordination. Her own leather jacket hung by the door, not a full vest like his, but marked with an old lady patch that designated her as his wife. The club took its traditions seriously. She handed him the mug, black no sugar, the way he'd been drinking it for 40 years. Eat something before we go. Not hungry. Marcus. Her tone carried that particular weight that meant she wasn't asking. He pulled a banana from the fruit bowl on the counter and peeled it, eating mechanically. Food was fuel, nothing more. He'd lost his taste for pleasure somewhere in Vietnam and never quite got it back. Christine said he approached meals the way soldiers approached MRE's necessary sustenance, not enjoyment. The drive to the clubhouse took 15 minutes, winding through streets Marcus had known for 45 years. Copperhead Falls wasn't large, maybe 15,000 residents, depending on how you counted the rural outskirts. It was the kind of town people moved to when they wanted to disappear from larger cities, or the kind of place people never left because leaving required more energy than staying. The downtown still had some of the old brick buildings from the mining days, though most had been converted to boutiques and coffee shops that catered to tourists passing through on their way to skiing. The Hells Angels clubhouse sat on the edge of the old industrial district, a converted warehouse with steel doors and small windows. It looked more like a fortress than a social club, which was intentional. Let people make assumptions. Marcus had learned long ago that reputation could be armor. 3 motorcycles were already parked outside when they arrived. Marcus recognized them immediately: Stone's Dynahammer's Road King and Iron Horse's custom trike. The old guard already here, despite the early hour. These were men who didn't sleep well, either men who understood that dawn came, whether you were ready for it or not. Marcus parked his truck. He saved the shovel head for pleasure rides, not errands, and helped Christine with the boxes of supplies in the back. Decorations mostly. Banners for the children's hospital donation boxes, strings of lights. The charity event had been Christine's idea originally 20 years ago, when she'd started handling the club's finances and realized they could do more than just exist. They could help. The clubhouse smelled like coffee and cigarettes when they entered. The main room was large, open with a bar along one wall and tables scattered throughout. Motorcycle memorabilia covered every surface, photographs from runs, patches, from visiting clubs, vintage signs advertising long-defunct oil brands. A pool table occupied one corner, its felt worn smooth from decades of games. This was home, in a way Marcus's actual house sometimes wasn't. This was where he belonged. Iron Horse stood by the coffee maker, pouring his 3rd or 4th cup, judging by his alertness. At 68, he was the oldest of the group, but he carried his age with the kind of stubborn vitality that suggested he'd live to 90 out of pure spite. His left arm ended just below the elbow, the result of a landmine in 1969. He'd learned to do everything one-handed, with the kind of adaptation that came from necessity. He looked up when Marcus and Christine entered, his weathered face creasing into something approximating a smile. "Morning, Black. Knee acting up again." Marcus set down the boxes. "How'd you know?" "I can always tell when a man's hurting," medics curse. Iron Horse had been a combat medic in Vietnam assigned to Marcus's unit in the last 6 months before they'd both rotated home. He'd saved Marcus's life twice, once from a bullet wound, once from the slower death of hopelessness. When Marcus had founded the club in 1979, Iron Horse had been his first recruit. Stone emerged from the back office, phone pressed to his ear. At 58, he was the youngest of the core leadership, a Gulf War Marine who'd found his way to Copperhead Falls via a long route involving addiction, prison, and eventual rehabilitation. He was lean where the others had thickened with age, still maintained the military bearing that never quite left Marines even decades after service. He finished his call and approached Marcus. "Hammer's running late, transmission issues. He need help." Said he's got it. "Be here in 30. Christine began unpacking the decorations, transforming the utilitarian space into something more festive, or at least attempting to. The clubhouse resisted domestication the way wild animals resisted cages. You could put up streamers and balloons, but the underlying nature remained unchanged. The front door opened again, admitting Preacher. At 71, he was the eldest of the group, a man who had served as a chaplain in Vietnam and had lost his faith somewhere between Da Nang and coming home. He'd found it again later, though, in a different form than the institutional religion he'd represented in uniform. His was a quieter faith, now personal and unspoken, except in moments of crisis when someone needed prayer, but didn't know how to ask for it. His white beard reached mid-chest, maintained with the same care Marcus gave his motorcycle. He carried a box of donuts, his traditional contribution to any gathering, and set them on the bar with the solemnity of a religious offering. He nodded to Marcus. "Brothers, shall we begin?" It wasn't a question. They gathered around one of the tables, the five of them, Marcus, Iron Horse, Stone Preacher, and Christine. The inner circle. The ones who made decisions, who carried the weight, who remembered when the club was just an idea and not an institution. Preacher's voice was soft, but carried in the quiet space. "For those we lost, for those we found, for those still finding their way." It was the same invocation he'd offered at every gathering for 40 years. Not quite a prayer, not quite a toast. A reminder that the club existed for a purpose beyond motorcycles and leather. They were here to help people who'd fallen through society's cracks. People like themselves. The ritual complete, they moved to business. Stone spread papers across the table, schedules, volunteer lists, donation tracking sheets. Christine had organized everything with her characteristic precision. The event would run from 6 to 10 p.m., featuring a motorcycle show, silent auction, and live music. Local businesses had donated prizes. The hospital would send representatives to accept the check. Stone tapped one of the papers. "Christine, we need to talk about the charity funds." She looked up from arranging decorations. "What about them?" $10,000 cash. It should be in the bank, not your office." "The event's tonight. Hospital gets it tomorrow." "What's the risk?" Marcus understood Stone's concern, even if he didn't share it. Stone was careful, maybe overly, so the kind of vigilance that came from having lost everything once and refusing to let it happen again. But Marcus trusted Christine's judgment. She'd been handling club finances for 20 years without incident. Iron Horse spoke before Marcus could. "Black, you look tired. You okay?" The question carried layers. Surface concern, yes, but also the deeper inquiry that came from men who'd seen each other at their worst. Iron Horse knew about the nightmares. They all did. They had their own. Marcus deflected the way he always did. "Fine, let's focus on tonight." But Iron Horse's eyes lingered on Marcus's hands, which rested flat on the table. The tremor was barely visible, but it was there. Iron Horse saw it. Marcus could tell by the slight tightening around the older man's eyes. But Iron Horse said nothing. That was the unspoken agreement between them. See everything, acknowledged nothing unless invited. Hammer arrived 15 minutes later, bursting through the door with the energy of a man perpetually at odds with mechanical objects. At 64, he'd retained the build of his army days, thick through the shoulders and chest, though his middle had expanded with age. He was missing 2 fingers on his right hand, lost not to combat, but to Agent Orange exposure that had led to cancer. The treatment had saved his life, but cost him parts of himself along the way. He grabbed a donut and coffee, joining them at the table. Transmission's shot. I'll need to rebuild it. Stone offered without hesitation. I'll help. Appreciate it. This was how it worked. No man stood alone. Problems were shared, solutions were collective. It was the foundation upon which Marcus had built the club, the recognition that isolation killed as surely as bullets and that survival required community. They worked through the logistics for another hour, dividing responsibilities, anticipating problems, confirming backup plans. Marcus listened more than he spoke, which was his style. Leadership he'd learned was less about talking and more about knowing when to let others lead. Christine's organizational skills shone through every detail. She'd thought of things Marcus never would have: parking arrangements, weather contingencies, accessibility for disabled visitors. She'd built the charity operation from a casual idea into something professional, something that actually mattered. In the past 20 years, they'd raised over $200,000 for local causes. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, but it was something. It was proof that broken men could still build. The conversation eventually drifted the way it always did when the old guard gathered. Work matters gave way to reminiscent stories that had been told so many times they'd acquired the patina of legend. Hammer's story about outrunning state police in 1985. Stone's tale of his first ride, a disaster involving a borrowed bike and a 3-day bender. Iron Horse's account of the time he delivered a baby in the clubhouse parking lot because the ambulance couldn't arrive fast enough. Marcus contributed little content to listen. These stories were part of the club's fabric, repeated not because they were new, but because repetition created identity. This is who we are. This is what we've done. This is why we matter. But beneath the surface warmth, Marcus felt something gnawing at him, a restlessness he couldn't quite name. He looked around the table at these men, his brothers closer than blood, and wondered how many more times they'd gather like this. Iron Horse was 68, Preacher was 71. How many years did any of them have left? And what came after Stone was younger could carry on. But Stone hadn't built this. He joined something already established. There was a difference between inheriting and creating. When Marcus was gone, would the club persist? Would it mean anything? Or would it slowly decay like everything else, entropy claiming one more thing that someone had built? Iron Horse caught Marcus's expression and read it with the ease of long familiarity. He leaned back in his chair, considering his next words carefully. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience. How long we've been doing this? Marcus understood the real question beneath the surface one. Charity drive, 20 years. Stone interjected. I mean us, this. He gestured to encompass the room, the brothers, the accumulated history represented by photographs and patches on the walls. I started this club in '79, 45 years. Silence settled over the table. Heavy, contemplative silence, the kind that came from shared recognition of mortality. Hammer stated what they were all thinking. We're getting old, brother. Preacher attempted humor, though it fell flat. Old, I'm ancient. My granddaughter asked if I knew Abraham Lincoln. Laughter came, but forced. The joke highlighted rather than diminished the reality. They were old, they were running out of time, and time didn't negotiate. Marcus felt the words building in his chest before he spoke them. I've been thinking about legacy. The others waited. This was new territory. Marcus didn't philosophize often. When he did, it meant something. What do we leave behind when we're gone? He looked at each of them in turn. A clubhouse, some motorcycles, is that enough? Iron Horse responded with the measured consideration that came from having wrestled with similar questions. We've helped hundreds of kids, veterans, families. I know, but Marcus trailed off, unsure how to articulate what he felt. It wasn't that their work didn't matter, it did, but there was something missing, some piece he couldn't identify. He thought about the photo on his mantle, Michael and Daniel at 8 and 5, faces full of innocence and trust that he'd destroyed. He'd spent 45 years helping strangers while his own children grew up hating him. Stone and Hammer both had kids. Iron Horse had a daughter he hadn't spoken to in decades. Preacher's son had died of an overdose 15 years ago. They were all carrying variations of the same weight, the knowledge that they'd built something noble out of their own rubble, but that nobility didn't erase what they'd lost along the way. Christine's hand found Marcus's shoulder, a gentle pressure, that said she understood even if he couldn't articulate it. She'd lived with his guilt for 38 years. She knew how it shaped him, how it drove him, how it whispered in quiet moments that nothing he built could ever be enough to make up for what he'd broken. The moment passed. Someone made a joke. Coffee was refilled. The conversation moved on. But the question lingered in the air like smoke. What is legacy, and is ours enough? They dispersed eventually, each man to his assigned tasks. Marcus found himself alone in the back office, the space Christine used for bookkeeping. It was small, barely larger than a closet, but organized with her characteristic precision. File cabinets, a desk, a computer, and on the desk a briefcase containing $10,000 in cash bound for the children's hospital. Marcus looked at the money and thought about all the things it represented: hospital equipment, treatments for sick kids, hope in its most tangible form. And he thought about his own children who'd needed him and received violence instead. He pulled open the bottom desk drawer where Christine kept a small photo album. He shouldn't look. He knew he shouldn't. But his hands moved anyway, opening the album to familiar pages. Michael at 3 years old holding a toy truck. Daniel at 6 months sleeping in Marcus's arms. Family photos from before everything fell apart. Marcus studied his own face in these pictures, younger, unscarred by time, but already carrying the shadow of Vietnam in his eyes. He'd thought he was handling it, thought he had the PTSD under control, thought drinking helped. He'd been wrong about all of it. The memory came unbidden vivid despite 40 years of distance. 1985. Marcus, 27 years old, 7 years back from Vietnam, 5 years deep in alcoholism. Michael was 8, Daniel was 5. Linda, his first wife, was 25 and desperate. Marcus had been drunk again. Not falling down drunk, he'd maintained better than that, but drunk enough that his edges had blurred. Drunk enough that the rage simmering beneath his surface had found cracks to escape through. Daniel had broken something. A glass, maybe? Or a plate. The object didn't matter. What mattered was Marcus's reaction. He'd yelled, not just raised his voice, but yelled with the kind of fury that made small children's eyes go wide with fear. Daniel had started crying, and Michael, protective even at 8, had stepped between his father and his brother. Don't yell at him. He's just a kid. 8 years old and braver than Marcus had ever been. Braver than Marcus deserved. Marcus had backhanded him. One motion, quick and thoughtless, the way his own father had hit him. Michael fell, struck his head on the corner of the coffee table. Blood immediately bright against his pale skin. Daniel screaming, Linda running in from the kitchen. The moment stretched across time, permanent and unchangeable. Marcus remembered the shock on Michael's face. Not the pain kids processed physical pain differently than emotional trauma, but the betrayal. The realization that his father, the person who was supposed to protect him, had hurt him instead. Linda had picked up Michael, pressed a towel to his bleeding forehead, and looked at Marcus with an expression he'd never forgotten. Not anger, worse. Disappointment. Finality. Get out! Marcus had sobered instantly, the way shock could cut through alcohol. Linda, I didn't mean, get out of this house right now. He'd tried to approach, tried to apologize, tried to explain about the war and the nightmares and how he was trying, but everything was so hard. She'd held Michael tighter and told him again to leave. Daniel was still crying. Michael was silent, blood seeping through the towel. Marcus had left. What else could he do? Linda took the boys and moved in with her sister. Filed for separation. Marcus spent 6 months trying to prove he'd changed, that he'd gotten sober, that he was going to therapy, that it would never happen again. And maybe it wouldn't have. Maybe he'd hit bottom and found a way back up. But Linda had died in 1990, killed by a drunk driver, the universe's cruel joke, and her sister had taken custody of Michael and Daniel. Marcus had tried to get them back. Hired a lawyer, presented evidence of his sobriety and rehabilitation. The court had held a hearing. The judge had asked Michael, then 13, where he wanted to live. Michael's answer had been clear, steady, and devastating. Not with him. He hit me. He scared us. I don't want to live with him. The judge had asked Daniel, 10 years old, the same question. Daniel had just cried and said he wanted his mom back. Custody went to the aunt. Marcus got visitation rights he tried to exercise until Michael at 15 had refused to see him anymore. Daniel had followed his older brother's lead. By 16 and 13, respectively, both boys had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with their father. Marcus had written letters. tried to call, sent birthday cards. Everything came back unopened or went unreturned. Eventually, he'd stopped trying, not because he'd stopped caring, but because he'd realized his attempts were selfish. He wasn't reaching out for their benefit. He was reaching out for his own to assuage his guilt, to feel like he was still a father, to convince himself he deserved forgiveness. The boys were men now. Michael was 48, Daniel was 45. Marcus knew almost nothing about their adult lives. Were they married? Did they have careers, families, dreams? Did they ever think about him? Did they still carry the scars he'd given them? He closed the photo album and returned it to the drawer. The past was immutable. He couldn't change what he'd done. He could only carry it and try to build something that mattered in spite of it. Christine's voice pulled him from the memory. Black. You okay? He turned to find her in the doorway, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. She'd known him long enough to recognize when he was spiraling. Fine, just thinking. About Michael and Daniel. It wasn't a question. She always knew. He stood the movement, making his knee protest. We should get back to setup. She didn't move. You know you did the best you could. Did I? Because my best destroyed 2 kids. You were sick. PTSD wasn't even well understood back then. You didn't have the resources. Don't make excuses for me. His voice came out harder than intended. Christine didn't flinch. After 38 years, she knew the difference between anger directed at her and anger directed at himself that had nowhere else to go. She moved closer, taking his hand. I'm not making excuses. I'm trying to help you see the full picture. You were a wounded veteran who didn't get the help he needed. You made terrible mistakes. You took responsibility. You got sober. You've spent 4 decades trying to make amends through this club. That matters. Does it? My sons don't talk to me. They don't even acknowledge I exist. What does this club matter if I couldn't be a father to my own children? The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. It was the question Marcus couldn't escape, the one that haunted every good thing he tried to do. He'd saved dozens of kids through the club's outreach programs. He'd given veterans places to belong when society had rejected them. He'd built a community that functioned as family for people who had none. But he'd failed Michael and Daniel, and that failure overshadowed everything else. Christine squeezed his hand. It matters because you're proving that people can change, that mistakes don't have to be final, that broken men can become builders. Broken men can become builders. Marcus repeated the phrase, testing its weight. He wanted to believe it, wanted to think that redemption was possible, that the universe kept accounting books, and that good works could balance bad ones. But late at night when the dreams came, and he woke up sweating through sheets that smelled like fear, he didn't believe it. He believed in consequences. He believed in scars that never healed. He believed that some things once broken stayed broken, no matter how carefully you tried to glue the pieces back together. Christine kissed his cheek, a gesture so familiar it had become automatic. Come on, we've got work to do. He followed her out of the office, leaving the photo album in its drawer, and his thoughts where they always lived, just below the surface, ready to emerge whenever his guard dropped. The rest of the morning passed in productive chaos. More volunteers arrived, club members, their families, community supporters, who'd bought into the charity's mission. The main room transformed slowly, taking on the appearance of an actual event space rather than a biker clubhouse. Streamers hung from the ceiling. Tables were arranged for the silent auction. The small stage was set up for the band that would play later. Marcus moved through it all, helping where needed, directing when necessary, but mostly just observing. Leadership wasn't always about action. Sometimes it was simply about presence, about being the steady point around which activity could organize itself. By noon, they'd accomplished enough to take a break. The volunteers dispersed to grab lunch. Marcus stepped outside for air, needing a moment away from the noise and activity. The day had warmed slightly, though winter's edge remained in the air. Traffic on the street was light. Copperhead Falls never got truly busy except during ski season. A few cars passed. A truck delivering supplies to one of the shops downtown. The rhythm of a small town, predictable and comforting in its consistency. Marcus leaned against the brick wall of the clubhouse, feeling the cold stone through his leather vest. His knee was bothering him again. He should probably take some ibuprofen, but he'd been trying to minimize his pill intake. Too many veterans of his generation had gone from prescription painkillers to harder stuff. He'd fought too hard for sobriety to risk it now. Movement across the street caught his attention. A girl, maybe 16, standing in the doorway of a closed storefront. She was watching the clubhouse with the kind of intensity that suggested more than idle curiosity. Her posture was defensive, shoulders hunched, backpack held close to her body. Even from this distance, Marcus could read the signs. Homeless, scared, hyper-vigilant in the way people became when they'd learned the world was dangerous. She reminded him of Stone's story about living on the streets at 15. Reminded him of the dozens of kids the club had helped over the years. Reminded him of Michael and Daniel, though they'd never been homeless. They'd just been terrified of their own father. Marcus considered crossing the street offering help. But he knew how that would look, 62-year-old biker approaching a teenage girl. She'd run, or worse, she'd comply out of fear and get herself into a situation even more dangerous than wherever she was running from. He made a mental note to mention her to Christine or one of the club women. They had a better chance of making contact, of offering assistance that wouldn't be threatening. The club had helped a lot of runaways over the years. They had connections with social services, knew which shelters were safe, could provide resources without judgment. Stone emerged from the clubhouse, 2 bottles of water in hand. He tossed one to Marcus and leaned against the wall beside him. For a while, they stood in companionable silence. This was one of the things Marcus valued about Stone. The man understood that not every moment needed to be filled with words. Sometimes presence was enough. Finally, Stone spoke. Kid across the street, watching us. So he'd noticed too. Marcus shouldn't be surprised. Stone had those same hyper-vigilant instincts, that constant scanning for threats that never quite went away after military service. Been there 30 minutes. How long you been watching? Long enough. Stone took a drink of water. Probably homeless. Yeah. Same backpack position as when I lived on the street. Everything you own kept close. Marcus knew Stone's story. After his discharge, he'd struggled with PTSD and opioid addiction. Lost his apartment, lost his job, ended up living under a bridge in Denver. He'd been clean now for 20 years, but those experiences never really left you. They just became part of the foundation of who you were. Want me to talk to her? Stone asked. Send one of the women, we'd just scare her off. Yeah. They continued watching. The girl shifted her weight from foot to foot, clearly cold but unwilling to move. She looked young and old at the same time, the way traumatized kids did. Her face had that hollowed-out quality that came from not eating regularly. Her clothes were worn but not dirty. She was trying to maintain, to not look homeless, to blend in. Marcus felt a familiar ache in his chest. He wanted to help. Wanted to cross the street and tell her she didn't have to be alone, that there were people who could help, that she mattered even if no one had told her that recently. But approaching would be a mistake. You couldn't force help on people. They had to choose to accept it. Stone finished his water. Maybe she'll still be there tonight, during the event. Maybe. We'll keep an eye out. Yeah. And the girl disappeared around the corner, and Marcus released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He wondered where she was going. Wondered where she'd sleep tonight. Wondered if she'd be okay. He knew the statistics. Teenage runaways face staggering rates of assault, exploitation, addiction, and death. The fact that she'd survived this long suggested either incredible luck or remarkable resilience. Probably both. Stone glanced at Marcus. You thinking about your boys? It wasn't a question. Stone knew Marcus well enough to read the connection. Homeless girl triggers thoughts about Marcus's own children, about the ways he'd failed them, about all the kids he'd helped to assuage the guilt of the 2 he'd hurt. Marcus didn't deny it. Always thinking about them. You know it wasn't all your fault. I hit my son Stone. How is that not my fault? I didn't say it wasn't your fault. I said it wasn't all your fault. You were sick. The VA failed you. The Army failed you. Society sent you to war and then forgot about you when you came home broken. You take too much of the blame. Marcus appreciated what Stone was trying to do, but it didn't change anything. Explanations weren't excuses. Context didn't erase consequences. Yes, he'd been failed by systems that should have supported him. Yes, he'd been dealing with untreated PTSD and self-medicating with alcohol. Yes, he'd been 27 years old and doing the best he could with tools he didn't have. None of that mattered to an 80-year-old boy with a cut on his forehead, looking at his father with betrayal in his eyes. Stone seemed to sense he wasn't getting through. He changed tactics. You going to be okay tonight? The event's going to be big. Lot of people, lot of noise. Marcus understood the real question. Large gatherings sometimes triggered his PTSD. Too many bodies, too much unpredictability. His therapist called it hypervigilance, this constant scanning for threats that had been necessary in combat and was maladaptive in civilian life. I'll be fine. It's controlled environment. Our people, our space. But if you're not, I know I'll step out if I need to. Stone nodded satisfied. This was the other side of brotherhood, not just the big gestures, but the small checks, the subtle monitoring, the unspoken agreements that no one faced their demons alone. They went back inside. The afternoon continued its pattern of preparation and setup. More volunteers arrived. The silent auction items were displayed. The band showed up early to do a sound check. Everything was coming together. By 6 p.m., the event was in full swing. The street outside was packed with motorcycles, not just Hells Angels, but members of allied clubs, veterans groups, and curious locals who'd seen the flyers. Inside the clubhouse was transformed. Music played, people mingled. The auction was getting competitive bidding. The cash donation box was filling up. Marcus moved through the crowd, greeting people, thanking volunteers, accepting congratulations on another successful event. He was good at this part, the public face, the leadership role, the image of competence and control. It was easier than the private moments when he was alone with his thoughts. Christine was in her element, coordinating everything with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. She'd pulled her hair back, wore her reading glasses on a chain around her neck, carried a clipboard. She looked happy. This was her project as much as his, maybe more. She'd turned his vague desire to help people into concrete action. At 8 p.m., the hospital representatives arrived to formally accept the check. Marcus stood on the small stage, microphone in hand, looking out at 200 people crammed into a space meant for maybe 75. They'd exceeded capacity hours ago, but no one seemed to care. He cleared his throat. Public speaking wasn't his favorite activity, but it was part of the job. Thank you all for coming tonight. 20 years ago, my wife Christine had an idea. She said we should use our resources to help kids. I said sure, thinking we'd raise maybe a few $100s. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Christine smiled from her position near the stage. We've raised over $200,000 in those 20 years. Not bad for a motorcycle club that everyone assumes is nothing but trouble. More laughter, this time appreciative. The club's reputation had been a double-edged sword. People either respected them for their charity work or suspected it was a front for criminal activity. Marcus had learned to live with both perceptions. This year, we're donating $10,000 to Copperhead Falls Children's Hospital. That money will go toward medical equipment, family support services, and treatment for kids who need it. It's not much in the big scheme of things, but it's what we have, and we give it gladly. Applause filled the room. Marcus waited for it to subside before continuing. A lot of people look at us and see bikers, outlaws, troublemakers. And yeah, we've had our moments, he paused for effect. But mostly we're just men who've been broken and put back together. We know what it's like to need help and not have anywhere to get it. So we try to be that help for others, especially kids. Kids didn't ask to be born into hard situations. They deserve better. He thought about Michael and Daniel as he spoke. Wondered if they'd ever know about the charity work, about all the kids he'd helped because he couldn't help them. Probably not. And even if they did, would it matter? The hospital director took the stage, accepting the oversized ceremonial check that Christine had ordered for the photo opportunity. Cameras flashed. People applauded. Marcus stepped back, letting the director speak about the hospital's needs and the impact of the donation. He scanned the crowd, a habit from his vigilance training. Make sure everyone was safe, that no threats were present, that everything was under control. His eyes caught on something, someone standing near the back door. The girl from earlier. The homeless one. She'd come inside, probably drawn by the warmth and the smell of food. She stood pressed against the wall, trying to be invisible, but Marcus's trained eyes found her anyway. Their gazes met across the crowded room. Her eyes went wide, caught one. She looked like she might bolt. Marcus gave her the slightest nod. You're okay. Stay if you want, and deliberately looked away, giving her the choice to remain without feeling observed. Christine had noticed too. She navigated through the crowd toward the girl, moving with the casual directness that made her so effective at this kind of outreach. Marcus couldn't hear what she said, but he saw Christine gesture toward the food table, saw the girl's hesitation, saw Christine smile, and wait patiently. Eventually, the girl nodded. Christine led her to the food, fixed her a plate, found her a corner where she could eat without being overwhelmed by the crowd. It was beautifully done. Help offered without judgment, agency, preserved dignity, maintained. The event continued. The band played. People danced, or at least moved rhythmically in a way that suggested dancing. The auction wrapped up winners collecting their prizes. By 9:30, the energy was starting to wind down, people filtering out gradually. Marcus helped with cleanup, stacking chairs, breaking down tables. The girl was still there, he noticed. She'd moved to a different corner, away from the remaining crowd, but she hadn't left. Christine kept a subtle eye on her without being obvious about it. At 10 p.m., only the core crew remained: Marcus, Christine, Stonehammer, Iron Horse Preacher, and about a dozen club members. And the girl still pressed against the wall, like she was waiting for something but didn't know what. Marcus was carrying a stack of auction displays toward the storage room when he heard Christine scream. The sound cut through everything, sharp and terrified. He dropped what he was holding and ran his knee, protesting violently. Stone and Hammer were already moving. The back office, that's where the scream had come from. Marcus reached the doorway first. Christine was on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass. The window above her desk was broken, jagged shards still clinging to the frame. A hole in the wall behind where she'd been sitting explained everything. Someone had shot at her. Marcus's combat training kicked in immediately, overriding the panic. He grabbed Christine, pulling her away from the window, checking for wounds. "Are you hit?" Her voice shook. "No, the glass broke and I dropped." Stone was at the window, gun drawn from somewhere on his person, scanning the street outside. "Shooter's gone." Hammer pulled out his phone, calling it in. Marcus held Christine, feeling her trembling against him. The bullet had missed her by inches. If she'd been sitting upright instead of leaning down to get something from her desk drawer, she'd be dead. His mind was calculating. Vinez's hands shook with adrenaline. He found professional hit, deliberate timing. Whoever did this knew the layout, knew where Christine would be, knew the event would provide cover noise. Iron Horse appeared in the doorway. "Everyone okay?" "Christine's fine, shaken but not hurt." The girl, the homeless girl, was suddenly there too, pushing past Iron Horse. Her face was pale, eyes enormous. "What?" "There was a man with a gun. I saw him, Everyone turned to her. Marcus released Christine carefully, making sure she could sit on her own, and focused on the girl. "You saw the shooter?" She nodded frantically. "I was outside, getting air. Too crowded in here. I saw a man get out of a black car. He was walking toward the window with something in his hand. I thought it was weird because who walks around holding things like that? And then I saw it was a gun, a black one, and he was raising it toward the window." Her words were tumbling out fast, adrenaline making her ramble. "I didn't think, I just ran, started yelling, 'Gun, gun, look out.' I didn't know if anyone would hear me over the music, but I had to try. I grabbed the door and came in and kept yelling, and then the shot happened and glass broke. And..." Stone interrupted gently. "Hey, breathe. You did good." The girl sucked in air like she'd been drowning. Marcus studied her, seeing details he'd missed before. Smart eyes, quick thinking, courage beyond her years. She'd seen danger and run toward it instead of away. That took something most adults didn't have. "Did you see his face?" Marcus asked. "No, he had a hat pulled low, and it was dark, but what? He had a tattoo on his wrist. When he raised the gun, his sleeve pulled back. I saw it." Marcus's chest tightened. "What kind of tattoo?" "A snake, coiled up, with red eyes. It was really detailed, like professional work." The room went silent. Every member of the club present knew what that tattoo meant. Marcus felt something inside him simultaneously break and solidify. The Snake Riders, Daniel's club, his son's club. Which meant, could it have been no? He wouldn't let himself complete the thought. Not yet. Not until he knew for certain. Christine's hand found his. She knew what he was thinking. Her voice was steady despite the trembling he could feel in her fingers. "Black, we don't know who it was." "Snake Rider's tattoo. How many of them have it?" A lot, Stone interjected. It's their signature. Every member gets one. Marcus knew this. He'd spent years tracking Daniel from a distance learning about the club his son had built. Snake Riders Motorcycle Club founded 15 years ago in retaliation against the Hells Angels. Daniel had built them into everything the Hells Angels weren't violent criminal feared. If Hells Angels represented redemption, Snake Riders represented revenge. And now someone from that club had tried to kill his wife. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Police would be here soon. They'd ask questions, file reports, investigate. Marcus would cooperate, but he already knew they wouldn't find the shooter. Snake Riders were too smart for that. He looked at the girl who was still standing there, shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She'd saved Christine's life. This complete stranger, this homeless kid who had nothing and owed them nothing, had risked herself to warn them. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. Her voice was small. "Riley." "Riley, you probably just saved my wife's life." She looked at Christine, then back at Marcus. "Is she okay?" "Thanks to you." Riley seemed to struggle with this information. Marcus recognized the expression she wasn't used to mattering, to having her actions result in positive outcomes, to being thanked instead of dismissed or worse. Christine stood brushing glass from her clothes. She walked to Riley, and before the girl could react, Christine hugged her. Riley froze, clearly not accustomed to affection from strangers. But after a moment, she softened slightly, accepting the embrace even if she didn't return it. When Christine pulled back, her eyes were wet. "Thank you." "I don't know how to thank you." Riley looked overwhelmed. "I didn't really do anything. I just yelled." "You ran toward danger to help someone you don't know. That's something." Police arrived, 2 officers from the Copperhead Falls PD, both of whom knew the club well enough to be cautious but not hostile. They took statements, photographed the scene, collected the bullet from the wall. Marcus gave them the facts without mentioning his suspicion about Daniel. Not yet, not until he had proof. When the police interviewed Riley, Marcus noticed her reluctance. She answered questions, but volunteered nothing. When they asked for her address, she gave a vague response. When they asked for parents or guardians, she said she was with family visiting town. The officers didn't push too hard. They were focused on the shooting, not on a teenage girl's living situation. But Marcus saw the lie, saw the fear beneath it, saw a kid who'd learned that cops rarely help people like her. After the police left, promising to investigate and patrol the area, the club members gathered in the main room. The cleanup could wait. They needed to talk. Stone spoke first. "Snake Riders. Has to be." Hammer agreed. "That tattoo's distinctive. Every member has it." Preacher's voice was quiet. "This is an act of war." Marcus had been expecting this. The club operated on strict codes. An attack on one member was an attack on all. The proper response was overwhelming retaliation. They'd done it before years ago when a rival club had gotten too aggressive. They'd crushed them, not through violence, but through collective presence, 100 bikers showing up wherever the rivals went until the rivals relocated to another state. But this was different. This was Daniel's club, his son's club. How could Marcus retaliate against his own son? Iron Horse seemed to read his thoughts. "Black, we need to talk about what this means." "I know what it means." "Do you? Because if Daniel ordered this, we don't know he did." "The hell we don't. He runs Snake Riders. Nothing happens without his approval." Marcus's hands were shaking again, but not from age this time, from rage and grief and a terrible helplessness. His son. His son had tried to kill his wife. How had it come to this? Christine's voice cut through. "We need to be smart, not reactive." Stone looked at her. "Someone tried to kill you, Christine. We can't just—" "I know, but rushing in angry will make things worse." She was right, Marcus knew. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were different things. Every instinct screamed at him to find Daniel, to confront him, to demand why. But that same instinct had gotten him into trouble 40 years ago when he'd hit Michael. Acting on rage never solved anything. Riley had been sitting quietly in the corner, trying to be invisible again. Marcus remembered her presence and turned. "Riley, thank you again for what you did. Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" The question hung in the air. Riley's face went carefully blank, the expression of someone who'd learned to hide vulnerability. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." "I've got it handled." Christine moved closer. Honey, it's almost midnight. It's 30 degrees outside. Where are you staying? I said I'm fine. Marcus recognized the defensive posture. Pride mixed with fear, mixed with the desperate need to not be a burden. He'd seen it in dozens of kids over the years. Hell, he'd been that kid once after Vietnam, sleeping in his car and insisting he was fine. How long you been on the street? He asked, keeping his voice neutral. Riley looked at the floor. I don't know what you're talking about. 4 days, 5. Her eyes snapped up, surprised that he'd guessed. How did you? I've been doing this a long time, helping kids. You're not the first runaway I've met. I'm not a runaway. I'm just running from what? Riley's jaw set stubbornly. Marcus let the silence stretch. Sometimes people needed space to decide whether to trust. Pushing too hard would just make her run. Finally, she spoke. Foster care. 4th family this year. Couldn't stay anymore. Why not? Does it matter? Yeah, it does. Riley looked at him, seemed to evaluate whether he actually cared or was just going through motions. Whatever she saw made her decide to answer. The dad, he came into my room at night, said things, touched my arm when no one was looking. I told the social worker. She said I was making it up for attention. Marcus felt rage rise in his throat, hot and familiar. Another adult failing another kid, another system that should protect instead enabling harm. He forced himself to stay calm, to not let his anger show. Riley needed steadiness, not more volatility. So you left. Yeah, and you've been on your own for 4 days. I can take care of myself. I don't doubt that, but you shouldn't have to. Riley looked confused, like the concept of adults caring about her well-being was foreign. I'm fine, really. I'll figure it out. Christine and Marcus exchanged glances. They'd had versions of this conversation dozens of times over the years. The protocol was established. Offer help, don't force it, provide resources, follow up later. But tonight felt different. This girl had saved Christine's life. That created an obligation beyond standard outreach. And Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that she'd shown up for a reason, that some combination of circumstances had brought her here at exactly the moment she was needed. Christine spoke gently. Riley, we have a guest room above our garage. It's clean, warm, and empty. You're welcome to stay tonight. No strings attached, just a safe place to sleep. Riley shook her head immediately. I can't. I don't know you. That's fair, but you saved my life tonight. Least I can do is make sure you don't freeze. I'm not some charity case, Marcus intervened. Never said you were, but it's midnight, it's cold, and you've had a hell of a night. Take the offer. Tomorrow you can figure out what comes next. Riley looked between them, clearly torn. She wanted to say yes. You could see it in the way her shoulders sagged with exhaustion. But fear held her back. Fear of obligation, fear of what might be expected in return, fear of trusting adults who might hurt her. Stone spoke up from across the room. Kid, I lived on the street when I was your age. Know what the worst part was, not the cold or the hunger. It was the constant vigilance. Never being able to fully relax. Never being safe. Riley looked at him. Stone continued. These people are offering you one night of safety. Take it. Tomorrow's problem is tomorrow's problem. Something in Stone's words got through. Riley's shoulders dropped another inch. Just tonight. Christine nodded. Just tonight, unless you want more, but no pressure. And you don't want anything. We want you to be safe, that's it. Riley seemed to wrestle with this. Finally, she nodded. Okay, just tonight. The club members dispersed after that, heading home with promises to meet tomorrow and discuss next steps. Stonehammer and Iron Horse would patrol the area overnight, just in case Snake Riders decided to make another move. Preacher would reach out to his contacts in other clubs gathering intelligence. Marcus, Christine, and Riley drove to the house in silence. Riley sat in the backseat, backpack clutched to her chest, looking out the window. Marcus watched her in the rearview mirror. She had that 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much too young. The guest room was exactly as Christine had described, clean, simple, and private. It was actually a converted apartment above the garage with its own entrance bathroom and small kitchenette. They'd built it years ago as rental income, but had instead used it for situations like this. Christine showed Riley around while Marcus waited downstairs. He could hear Christine's voice, patient and warm, explaining where things were, how to work the heater, where she'd put fresh towels. When she came back down, her eyes were sad. She's terrified. Trying not to show it, but terrified. I know. Did you see her hands, bruised knuckles? She's been in fights. Street'll do that. They walked back to the main house together. Marcus's knee was killing him, the long day having taken its toll. He took 2 ibuprofen and collapsed onto the couch. Christine sat beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. They didn't need to. 38 years of marriage meant understanding silences. Finally, Christine broke it. It was Daniel, wasn't it? Marcus had been waiting for the question. Probably. How does that make you feel? How do you think? I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Marcus rubbed his face, feeling the stubble that had grown over the course of the day. I feel like I created a monster. I destroyed my son's childhoods, and now one of them tried to kill my wife. How's that for legacy? You don't know for certain. Christine, Snake Riders, the tattoo. Daniel runs that club. Even if he didn't pull the trigger himself, he approved it. Then we need to talk to him. He won't talk to me. He hasn't spoken to me in 32 years. Then we make him listen. Marcus looked at his wife, this woman who'd stood beside him through decades of struggle and growth. She'd married a broken veteran and helped him become something better. She'd supported the club even when it was just a wild idea. She'd turned his vague desire to help into concrete action. And now she was sitting here calm and steady after someone tried to kill her. How are you so calm? He asked. I'm not. I'm terrified. But being scared doesn't help anything. Someone shot at you. I know. You could have died. But I didn't. Thanks to that girl. They both looked toward the window that faced the garage apartment. A light was on in Riley's room. Marcus wondered if she was sleeping or if she was too wired, too accustomed to vigilance to relax even in a safe space. Christine leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder. We're going to figure this out. How? I don't know yet, but we will. Marcus wasn't sure he shared her confidence. The situation felt impossibly tangled. His son had tried to kill his wife. The club would expect retaliation. Daniel clearly wanted war. And caught in the middle was a homeless girl who'd risked everything to help strangers. He thought about Riley up in that apartment. Thought about Michael and Daniel when they were her age, already lost to him. Thought about all the kids the club had helped over 45 years. Thought about legacy and redemption and whether any amount of good could balance out the bad. Christine's breathing evened out, indicating she'd fallen asleep against his shoulder. Marcus stayed still, not wanting to disturb her. His own exhaustion pulled at him, but he resisted. Sleep meant dreams, and tonight the dreams would be worse than usual. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, then 1 a.m. Marcus stared at nothing, thinking about sons and daughters and the families we destroy and the families we build to replace them. Finally, around 2 a.m., he carefully extricated himself from Christine and helped her to bed. She murmured something incoherent and settled immediately into deep sleep. Marcus envied her ability to shut down when needed. He went back to the porch, his familiar spot, and sat in the cold November darkness. The street was empty. The town was asleep. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably awake too. Maybe also sitting on a porch. Maybe also wondering how they'd reached this point. Marcus thought about calling him. He had the number. He'd kept track of Daniel over the years, collecting information without ever reaching out. But what would he say? Did you try to kill my wife? Seemed too accusatory. I'm sorry I was a terrible father. Seemed too little too late. The sky began to lighten around 5 a.m. Another gray dawn, another day of carrying weight that never got lighter. Marcus watched the sunrise and thought about the girl sleeping in his garage, about the wife who'd almost died, about the son who'd tried to kill her, about the other son who'd disappeared into a life Marcus knew nothing about. Legacy. That was the question he'd posed yesterday morning. What do we leave behind when we're gone? He still didn't have an answer. But sitting there in the November cold, watching another day arrive, whether he was ready for it or not, Marcus made a decision. He couldn't fix the past. Couldn't undo the damage he'd done to Michael and Daniel. Couldn't erase 32 years of silence and pain. But he could try to save Riley. Could try to give her what he'd failed to give his own children: safety, stability, a reason to believe that adults could be trustworthy. It wouldn't balance the scales, nothing would, but it would be something, and something Marcus had learned was better than nothing. The sun cleared the mountains, washing the world in cold light. Marcus stood his knee, protesting as always, and went inside to start coffee. Christine would be awake soon. Riley would need breakfast. The club would gather to discuss strategy. Life continued momentum, carrying them forward whether they were ready or not. All any of them could do was meet it standing up, face it head on, and try to be better than they'd been yesterday. Marcus thought about the girl in the garage apartment, about the courage it had taken to run toward danger instead of away from it. 16 years old and already braver than most people twice her age. She deserved better than the hand she'd been dealt. They all did. He poured coffee and waited for Christine to wake, for Riley to emerge, for the next crisis to announce itself. Because there would be a next crisis. There always was. The question wasn't whether trouble would come, but whether you'd be ready when it did. Marcus Morrison, at 62 years old with trembling hands and bad knees and 43 years of guilt eating at him, was as ready as he'd ever be. Ready to face his son, ready to protect his wife, ready to try one more time to build something that mattered out of the rubble of all his mistakes. The day stretched ahead, full of unknown variables and inevitable confrontations. But for now, in this quiet moment before the storm, Marcus allowed himself to feel something close to hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe redemption was still possible. Maybe broken men could become builders, one careful choice at a time, one day at a time, until eventually the weight didn't feel quite so heavy. Maybe. The motorcycles arrived in waves throughout the night, their engines announcing each new contingent before they materialized in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus stood at the clubhouse window, watching headlights cut through fog that had settled over Copperhead Falls like cotton batting. Each bike represented a brother answering the call, driving through cold November night because one of their own had been attacked. By 3 a.m., the street was lined with chrome and leather. 50 bikes, then 100. Men dismounted, stretched, road-stiff muscles greeted each other with the abbreviated gestures of those who'd shared foxholes and jail cells and years of accumulated trust. They didn't ask questions. They simply came. Stone appeared beside Marcus, two steaming cups in hand. He passed one over without speaking. The coffee was terrible, burned and bitter, but warmth was warmth. They stood together, watching the assembly grow. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Iron Horse 200 confirmed. More coming. The size of the response didn't surprise Marcus. An attack on a president's wife was an attack on the entire brotherhood. The protocol was clear: show overwhelming force, remind enemies that Hell's Angels didn't stand alone, demonstrate that violence against one invited retribution from thousands. But this wasn't a simple rival club dispute. This was family destroying family, and the knowledge sat in Marcus's chest like swallowed glass. Stone finally broke the silence, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of a man walking through a minefield. We need to talk about Daniel. Marcus had been expecting this. Dreading it, but expecting it. He took a long drink of the awful coffee, buying himself seconds to organize thoughts that refused to stay organized. Stone continued when Marcus didn't respond. Every brother out there is ready to go to war. They're waiting for your order. I know, but you can't give it because he's your son. The words hung between them, sharp-edged and unavoidable. Marcus set down his cup, watched the liquid inside tremble. Whether from his hands or the vibration of idling engines outside, he couldn't tell. If it was anyone else's kid, Stone said quietly, what would you tell them to do? Marcus knew the answer. He'd given versions of the same advice dozens of times over 45 years. Family didn't excuse violence. Blood didn't grant immunity. Being someone's father didn't mean protecting them from consequences. He'd told other men they had to choose between their children and their principles, had watched them make those impossible choices, had supported them afterward. But knowing what he'd tell someone else and knowing what to do himself were different animals entirely. The clubhouse door opened, admitting a gust of cold air, and 3 more brothers men from the Denver chapter 2 hours north. They nodded to Marcus, respect and readiness in their weathered faces. One was missing an eye, the socket covered by a leather patch. Another had burn scars covering the left side of his face. The third walked with a pronounced limp. Warriors marked by their wars come to stand with other warriors. Marcus thought about Michael and Daniel as children before everything shattered. Michael at 8, already developing that protective instinct that would eventually drive him to step between his father and his brother. Daniel at 5, all energy and questions, the kind of kid who couldn't sit still, who needed to know why about everything. Where had that boy gone? How had he transformed into someone capable of ordering a hit on an innocent woman? Marcus knew the answer. He'd destroyed that boy himself, one drunken rage at a time, until the child who'd looked at him with love learned to look at him with fear. Instead, and fear given enough time and enough pain, calcified into hate. Christine found him an hour later, still standing at the window, though the view had shifted. 400 motorcycles now, maybe more, lining every available space. Men had built fires in oil drums, gathering around the flames against November's bite. The scene looked medieval, something out of a history book about Vikings or warriors from forgotten centuries. She slipped her hand into his. Her fingers were cold despite the clubhouse's warmth. She'd always run cold, needed extra blankets, even in summer wore his shirts because they were warmer than hers. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You haven't slept." Couldn't. The dreams? Different dreams. Worse ones. She squeezed his hand, understanding, without requiring elaboration. 38 years meant she could read his silences better than most people read words. She knew he was seeing his sons, was replaying every mistake, was cataloging the precise moments where different choices might have led to different outcomes. Marcus glanced toward the office where the shooting had occurred. Someone had boarded up the broken window, but the temporary plywood couldn't hide what had happened. His son had tried to kill his wife. That fact sat in his mind like a tumor, something foreign and malignant that he couldn't extract. "We need to talk to him," Christine said. Not a suggestion, a statement of necessity. "He won't talk to me, hasn't in 32 years. Then we make him listen. How show up with 400 bikers and force a conversation? That's not dialogue, Chris. That's intimidation. I don't mean force. I mean, create a situation where he has to acknowledge us, where silence isn't an option." Marcus understood what she was suggesting. Make the silence more uncomfortable than speaking. Make avoidance harder than engagement. It was the same strategy they used with runaway kids. Don't chase them, just consistently offer a better option until staying away became more painful than coming closer. But Daniel wasn't a confused teenager. He was a 45-year-old man who'd spent decades building armor against the father who'd hurt him. That kind of protection didn't dissolve easily. Movement outside caught Marcus's attention. Riley emerged from the garage apartment, picking her way carefully through the sea of motorcycles. She looked even younger in daylight, wearing the same worn clothes from last night. Her backpack was strapped to her shoulders, ready to run if needed. Marcus recognized. That vigilance never quite left you, even in safe spaces. Christine noticed too. "I'll go talk to her." She left Marcus at the window and intercepted Riley near the clubhouse entrance. Through the glass, Marcus watched them talk. Riley's body language was defensive at first, shoulders hunched, eyes averted, but Christine had a gift for making people feel heard. Gradually, Riley's posture softened. She nodded, followed Christine inside. When they entered, Riley's eyes went wide at the sight of all the men. Some were cooking breakfast on portable grills outside. Others were working on motorcycles, that perpetual maintenance that kept machines running. A few were sleeping on the clubhouse floor, using leather jackets as pillows. It looked like a military encampment, which wasn't far from the truth. Riley found Marcus by the window. Her voice was small. "Did all these people come because of last night?" "Yes." "Because of me." "Because of my wife. But you saved her, so in a way, yes. Because of you." Riley processed this, clearly overwhelmed. "I just yelled. I didn't do anything special." Iron Horse approached, moving with the ease of someone who'd long ago adapted to his disability. He studied Riley with the same assessment Marcus had seen him use on wounded soldiers in Vietnam, quick, thorough, seeing past surfaces to the damage underneath. "You ran toward danger instead of away from it. That's rare, especially for someone your age." Riley looked at the floor. "I had to do something. Most people don't. Most people freeze or run. You moved. That's the difference between living and surviving." The distinction seemed to resonate with Riley. She glanced up, meeting Iron Horse's eyes. "Which one are you?" "Used to be surviving. Took me 20 years to start living." He gestured to his missing arm. Lost this in '69, landmine. Spent 2 decades being angry about it. Then I realized Ikaru was just another way of dying slowly. Riley absorbed this. Marcus recognized the look on her face. She was cataloging Iron Horse's words, storing them away for later examination. Smart kid, damaged but smart. Preacher arrived with Dawn bringing donuts and his particular brand of quiet wisdom. He surveyed the gathered brothers, the encampment atmosphere, the controlled tension that came from warriors waiting for orders. He set the donuts on the bar and moved directly to Marcus. How many now? 500, maybe 6. And you're planning what exactly? It was the question Marcus had been avoiding. I don't know yet. You're going to have to decide soon. These men came ready for war. You can't leave them hanging. Marcus knew this. Leadership meant making decisions, especially hard ones, especially when no good options existed. But every choice he considered led to pain, either betraying his brother's trust or confronting his son with violence. Preacher seemed to read his struggle. His voice dropped, meant only for Marcus. You can't protect him from this. He's my son. He tried to kill your wife. The words landed like physical blows. Marcus wanted to argue to find some explanation that made this less devastating. But Preacher was right. Daniel had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Blood didn't excuse attempted murder. The old chaplain continued, his tone gentle but uncompromising. I know what you're feeling. Torn between two families, the one you were born into and the one you built. But sometimes you have to choose. What if I choose wrong? Then you'll carry that, same as you carry everything else. But not choosing is also a choice, Black. And it might be the worst one. Marcus looked out at the gathering. Men who'd answered his call, who'd driven through the night, who trusted him to lead them correctly. They deserved better than a president paralyzed by personal tragedy. Stone appeared with his phone screen showing a text message. Hammer and Dog found the car from last night, abandoned 2 miles from here, running the plates now. Progress. Marcus seized on it, grateful for concrete action. Any surveillance footage from nearby businesses? Working on it. Most shops in that area close by 9, but there's a gas station with cameras. Getting the footage now. Riley had been listening from her position near the wall. She stepped forward, hesitantly. I can describe him again. Better, I mean. I've been thinking about what I saw. Stone pulled out his notebook. Riley closed her eyes, that peculiar concentration of someone replaying memory. He was tall, over 6 feet. The way he moved it was purposeful. Military, maybe, or someone with training. He checked both directions before approaching. Not nervous checking, but tactical, like he'd done this before. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. That description could fit dozens of people, but combined with the Snake Rider's tattoo, it narrowed considerably. Riley continued, the eyes still closed. The tattoo was here. She touched her inner left wrist. And when he raised the gun, I saw something else. Another tattoo on his forearm, smaller. I couldn't see details, but it looked like letters or maybe numbers. Stone was writing quickly. What kind of letters? I don't know. It was dark and he moved fast, but there was definitely something else there. Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, unknown number. His thumb hovered over the decline button, but something made him answer. Yeah. The voice on the other end was distorted, filtered through some kind of modulator, but Marcus would have recognized the cadence anywhere. 32 years of silence hadn't erased his son's speech patterns. Hello, Dad. Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. Around him, conversation ceased. Everyone could tell from his expression that this wasn't a casual call. Danny Mahom, been a long time. 32 years. 32 years, 7 months, 14 days. But who's counting? The specificity was painful. Daniel had been keeping track, marking time like a prisoner marking cell walls. Marcus forced himself to breathe evenly, to not let emotion override reason. Was that you last night? Silence on the line, stretching uncomfortably. Then you know it was. The admission felt like being shot. Suspecting was one thing, knowing was another. Marcus's free hand braced against the window frame. Christine was suddenly beside him, her presence anchoring him. Why? His voice cracked on the word. Why, Christine? She never hurt you. Daniel's laugh was bitter, corroded by decades of resentment. She never hurt me, Dad. She replaced us. You kicked at Mike and me out of your life, and then you built a whole new family with her. You chose her. You chose all these strangers in your biker club, but you didn't choose us. That's not your mother took you. The court, don't blame mom. She protected us from you. She did what she had to do after you. Daniel's voice rose, then caught. When he continued, the words came quieter but more venomous. After you taught me that fathers hit sons, that love comes with fists. Marcus couldn't argue. The truth sat between them, undeniable and ugly. He had hit Michael. He had scared both boys. He had destroyed their sense of safety. No amount of sobriety or rehabilitation or charity work erased that foundational betrayal. I was sick, Marcus said, hating how inadequate it sounded. I had PTSD from Vietnam. I didn't know how to. Excuses, 30 years of excuses. You know what I learned from you, Dad? I learned that violence is how you express love. I learned that the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you should fear most. I learned that fathers are liars who say they'll change and never do. But I did change. I got sober. I built this club to help people, to help strangers, to save everyone except your own sons. Daniel's voice broke. Do you know what it was like, watching you rescue kid after kid, giving them everything you never gave us? Every newspaper article about your charity work was a knife in my chest. The pain in Daniel's voice was raw, unfiltered. 45 years old and still bleeding from wounds inflicted when he was 5. Marcus understood intellectually that trauma didn't heal on a schedule, that childhood damage could last lifetimes. But hearing his son's anguish made that understanding visceral. I'm sorry. The words felt microscopic against the magnitude of damage. Danny, I'm sorry. I was a terrible father. I failed you and Mike in every way that matters. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve it. But your mother, Christine, she didn't fail you. She wasn't there. Why hurt her? Because you love her more than you ever loved me. The logic was the logic of a wounded child, not a grown man. But Marcus recognized it anyway, the desperate mathematics of damaged kids who equated love with attention, who measured worth by comparison, who believed that for someone new to be loved, someone old had to be discarded. That's not true, Marcus said. I loved you. I love you. I was just too broken to show it correctly. Too late now. It's never too late. Daniel laughed again, that same corroded sound. Yes, it is. I'm 45. You're 62. We're strangers who happen to share DNA. Whatever chance we had died the day you raised your hand to Mike. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to insist that redemption was always possible, that relationships could be rebuilt. But the words stuck in his throat because he wasn't sure they were true. Some things once broken stayed broken. Some distances once created couldn't be closed. So what now? Marcus asked. You're going to keep trying to kill my wife until you succeed? I'm going to make you feel what I felt. I'm going to take away everything you love piece by piece until you understand what it's like to lose your family. Danny don't. And that girl, Riley, the one who saved Christine, I know where she is. Marcus's blood froze. She's 16 years old. She's got nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with it. She saved your wife. She's another kid you're going to rescue, another stranger you'll choose over your own sons. So yeah, she's involved. If you touch her, Derita, you'll what? Come find me. We both know you won't, because you're too ashamed to face me. You've been too ashamed for 32 years. The line went dead. Marcus stood holding the silent phone, feeling like he'd been physically struck. Around him, his brothers waited, reading disaster in his expression. Stone spoke first. What did he say? Marcus forced himself to focus, to compartmentalize emotion and think tactically. He admitted it was him, or at least his order. He's threatening Christine again, and Riley. Hammer's response was immediate. Then we move on, Snake Riders. Now, all of us. Several brothers voiced agreement, the energy in the room shifting toward violence. Marcus raised his hand, calling for silence. They gave it instantly but reluctantly. We're not doing this. Confusion rippled through the gathering. Iron Horse voiced what others were thinking. Blackie tried to kill your wife. Threatened her again. Threatened a kid under our protection. We have to respond. I know. Then what are we waiting for? Marcus looked at the faces surrounding him. Good men, loyal men, men who'd follow him into hell if he asked. But he couldn't ask them to go to war against his son. That burden was his alone. I'm going to talk to him. Face to face, Stone objected immediately. He'll kill you. Maybe. That's suicide, Black. It's the only way. If I show up with all of you, it's intimidation. But if I go alone, maybe he'll actually talk. Christine's voice cut through sharp with fear and determination. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. He's angry at me. At us. This is between the three of us. Chris, you don't get to protect me from this. He tried to kill me. I deserve to face him too. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to invoke husband authority or club hierarchy or any of the dozen reasons why Christine should stay behind where it was safe, but he saw the set of her jaw, the steel in her eyes, and knew arguing would be pointless. Preacher cleared his throat. If you're determined to do this, at least let us position nearby. Not interfering, just present, in case things go wrong. It was a reasonable compromise. Marcus nodded. We'll set up a meeting, neutral ground. Danny and me, Christine if she insists. The rest of you stay back unless you need us, Stone finished. We'll be there. Planning consumed the next hours. Reaching out to snake riders required delicate negotiation. Stone made calls to intermediaries, people who straddled the line between clubs, who could arrange conversations without triggering immediate violence. The message was simple. Marcus Morrison wanted to talk to his son. Neutral location, no weapons, just conversation. The response came faster than expected. Daniel agreed. An abandoned factory on the edge of town, 7 p.m. Marcus only. Anyone else showed up, Daniel would leave. Marcus spent the afternoon preparing. Not weapons he'd promised to come unarmed, but mentally, emotionally gathering the fragments of things he'd wanted to say for 32 years into some kind of coherent message. Riley found him in the early afternoon sitting alone in the clubhouse office. She knocked hesitantly on the doorframe. Can I come in? Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat backpack still on that perpetual readiness to flee. He understood it. Trusted spaces were rare when you'd learn that safety was temporary. I heard what he said about me. Her voice was steady but small. I can leave. Go somewhere else. I don't want to be the reason you're not leaving. But if I'm putting everyone in danger, you saved my wife's life. That makes you family. We don't abandon family when things get hard. Riley looked at him with something like wonder. You barely know me. I know you ran toward danger to help a stranger. I know you are scared, but you're not letting fear control you. I know you're 16 and you've probably seen more ugliness than most people see in a lifetime. That's enough. She bit her lip, fighting emotion. My whole life, nobody wanted me. Foster homes treated me like a problem to solve. Social workers saw me as a case file. Teachers looked through me like I was invisible. You're not invisible here. Why, what makes me different from all the other kids you've helped? Marcus considered the question. The honest answer was complicated. Riley had saved Christine, yes, but she'd also appeared at a moment when Marcus needed to believe that redemption was still possible. She represented a second chance at fatherhood, a way to do right what he'd done so terribly wrong before. But he couldn't say all of that to a traumatized 16-year-old. So he simplified. You're not different. You're just here. And being here is enough. Christine appeared in the doorway holding a small bag. I got you some things. Clothes that might fit, toiletries, basics. Wasn't sure what you needed, so I guessed. Riley took the bag like she was receiving something precious. You didn't have to. I know, but I wanted to. The simple kindness seemed to overwhelm Riley. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Christine sat beside her, not touching, but present. After a moment, Riley spoke. Nobody's ever just been nice to me. There's always something they want. Foster parents want the check. Social workers want compliance. Teachers want me to be quiet. But you, she looked between Marcus and Christine. You're not asking for anything. We're asking you to let us help, Christine said gently. That's all. Riley nodded, swiping at her eyes. Okay, yeah, I can do that. As 7 p.m. approached, Marcus prepared to leave. He changed into clean clothes, not his leather vest, which carried too much weight, but simple jeans and a jacket. He wanted to meet his son as a father, not as a club president. Christine was waiting by the truck, her own jacket on. They'd argued about her coming, but she'd won. She always won when she decided something mattered. Stone gathered the brothers for final instructions. We'll be in position by 6:30, eyes on the location but out of sight. First sign of trouble, we move by you. Iron Horse added, Black, you've got your phone. Call goes through, we'll hear it. Just say the word. Marcus nodded, accepting their concern, while trying not to think too hard about what requiring rescue would mean. If things went that wrong, if Daniel escalated to actual violence, Marcus wasn't sure he'd be able to defend himself. How do you fight your own child? The drive to the factory took 15 minutes. The building had been abandoned for years, victim of Copperhead Falls' slow economic decline. Graffiti covered the exterior walls. Windows were broken or boarded up. The parking lot was cracked concrete and weeds. Daniel's motorcycle was already there, a black and chrome monster, custom paint showing a coiled snake with ruby eyes. The Snake Rider's signature, a statement of identity and ownership. Marcus parked and turned off the engine. For a moment, he and Christine sat in silence. Whatever happens, she said quietly, don't apologize for me. For us. You've built a good life. Don't let him make you feel guilty for that. I destroyed his childhood. You were sick and you got better. That's not a crime. It doesn't feel like enough. It never will, but it's what you have. They got out. The factory door stood open, darkness beyond. Marcus's heart was pounding, his palms sweating despite the cold. This was worse than any firefight in Vietnam. In combat, enemies were clear. But facing your own damaged son, knowing you'd created that damage, there was no training for that. They stepped inside. The interior was vast, empty, except for old machinery and scattered debris. Dim light filtered through broken windows, and in the center of the space waiting was Daniel. Marcus hadn't seen his son in 32 years. The last time Daniel had been 13, still carrying traces of childhood in his face. The man standing there now was a stranger, tall, broad-shouldered, weathered by time and choices. But the eyes were the same. Those were still Daniel's eyes, his mother's eyes, looking at Marcus with an expression that mixed hatred and longing and pain so deep it had become identity. Father and son faced each other across 30 feet of empty factory floor. 30 feet that might as well have been 30 years, 30 decades, 30 lifetimes of distance. Daniel spoke first, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. You actually came. You asked me to. I didn't think you would. Thought you'd hide behind your brothers like always. Marcus let the jab land without responding. Christine moved to stand beside him, a united front. Daniel's eyes shifted to her. So you're the woman worth more than his sons. Christine's voice was steady. I'm the woman he built a life with after you and your brother decided you didn't want him in yours. Decided we were kids. We didn't decide anything. He destroyed our family and then acted like we were the ones who walked away. Marcus found his voice. You're right, I destroyed our family. I take responsibility for that. I was drunk, violent, and dangerous. I failed you both. That's on me. Daniel seemed surprised by the direct admission. His prepared defenses wavered slightly. That's it. No excuses about the war, about PTSD, about how hard it was. Those are explanations, not excuses. I had reasons for why I was broken. I didn't have an excuse for breaking you. The distinction seemed to reach something in Daniel. His posture shifted infinitesimally, some of the rigid anger loosening. Do you know what it was like, being 10 years old and watching other kids with their dads, father-son baseball games where I went alone? School plays where I looked for you in the audience and you were never there. Every birthday thinking maybe this year you'd call. And you never did. I wrote letters. I burned them, unread. I called. I changed my number. The admissions hung between them. Daniel had actively rejected Marcus's attempts at contact, but Marcus understood why. Sometimes survival required amputation. Daniel had cut away the infected limb of their relationship to save himself. Marcus took a step forward. Daniel tensed but didn't retreat. Then how do I reach you now? You don't. It's too late. I don't believe that. Believe what you want. It doesn't change reality. Christine spoke again. What do you want, Daniel, actually want? Not revenge, not to hurt us. But what would make this better? Daniel laughed, that corroded sound Marcus had heard on the phone. Better nothing makes this better. You can't give me back my childhood. Can't undo 32 years of silence. Can't make me forget what it felt like to be unwanted. You weren't unwanted, Marcus said. You were wounded, and I was the one who wounded you. But I never stopped wanting you. Then why didn't you fight harder? Why did you just let us go? The question struck at Marcus's deepest shame. Because I thought you'd be better off without me. I thought I was poison, and keeping distance was the kindest thing I could do. So you chose for us, again, just like you chose to drink, just like you chose to hit Mike, just like you chose everyone else over us. Marcus had no defense. Every point Daniel made was valid. He'd made choices, terrible choices, and those choices had consequences that reverberated across decades. The sound of footsteps interrupted. From the shadows emerged 6 men, snake riders all wearing their colors, all looking ready for violence. Daniel had brought backup despite the agreement. Christine moved closer to Marcus. He fought the urge to reach for a weapon he didn't have. This was either about to end in conversation or bloodshed. Daniel raised his hand, stopping his men. They're leaving soon. Just wanted them to see my father, the great Blackjack Morrison, president of Hell's Angels, champion of lost causes, savior of everyone except his own kids. Marcus understood the performance aspect. Daniel needed his men to see him as powerful, needed to demonstrate control, needed to justify the hit on Christine by framing Marcus as a villain. Gang leadership required mythology, and Daniel was building his. If you're going to kill me, Marcus said quietly, then do it. But leave Christine and Riley alone. They didn't earn your hate. I did. Daniel studied him for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe, of the man Marcus used to be versus the man he'd become. Or perhaps just exhaustion. Hate was tiring. Carrying resentment for 32 years had to be its own kind of prison. I'm not going to kill you, Daniel said finally. That would be too easy, too final. I want you to live with this. Want you to wonder every day if today's the day I come for someone you love. Want you to feel what I felt, the constant fear, the knowledge that safety is temporary, that the people you count on can vanish. He turned toward the door, his men following. At the threshold, he looked back. Stay away from me, Dad. Stay away from my club. Stay away from my life. You gave up the right to be my father a long time ago. Don't try to reclaim it now. Then he was gone, taking his brothers and his pain with him. The sound of motorcycles starting filtered through broken windows, then faded into distance. Marcus and Christine stood alone in the abandoned factory, neither speaking. After a moment, Christine's hand found his. At least he didn't shoot us. Marcus almost laughed. Trust Christine to find the optimistic angle. Yeah, there's that. They walked back to the truck. Stone called immediately, voice tight with concern. You okay? We saw snake riders leave. We're fine, he just wanted to make a point. Which was that I can't fix this, that some things stay broken. Stone was quiet for a moment. You coming back to the clubhouse? Yeah, give us 20 minutes. The drive back was silent. Marcus replayed the encounter, analyzing every word, every expression, looking for some opening he'd missed, some moment where he could have said the right thing and changed the trajectory. But no such moment existed. Daniel's damage went too deep, had calcified into identity. He wasn't a hurt boy anymore. He was a man who'd built his entire adult life around the foundation of that hurt. At the clubhouse, the brothers were waiting. Marcus gave them a brief summary. Daniel had shown up, made his position clear left. No violence, no resolution, just confirmation that the divide between them was permanent. Riley was there too, sitting in a corner with a plate of food Christine had prepared earlier. She watched Marcus with concern that seemed disproportionate to their short acquaintance. But maybe that was how damaged kids operated. They recognized kindred spirits, other people carrying wounds, and formed attachments quickly because they understood that safety was never guaranteed. Iron Horse pulled Marcus aside. What's the plan? Keep Riley safe. Keep Christine safe. Watch for snake riders. Beyond that, he shrugged. I don't know. That's not a plan. That's reacting. You have a better idea? Iron Horse considered. Yeah, we make Daniel irrelevant. He wants to hurt you by threatening the people you care about. So we make those people untouchable. 24/7 protection. Rotation of brothers. No one goes anywhere alone. It was sound strategy. Marcus nodded agreement. Set it up. The next days established new patterns. Riley moved permanently into the garage apartment with understanding that she could leave whenever she chose, but while she stayed, she was family. Christine worked from home, brothers, rotating guard duty. Marcus rarely left the clubhouse, maintaining constant communication with his network. 3 days after the factory meeting, Detective Sarah Reeves from CPS appeared at Marcus's door. She was a woman in her 40s, professional demeanor but kind eyes. She'd worked with the club before on various youth outreach programs. Mr. Morrison, we need to talk about Riley Harper. Marcus had been expecting this. You couldn't have a 16-year-old runaway living in your garage without eventually attracting official attention. He invited Detective Reeves inside, called for Christine. They sat at the kitchen table. Reeves had to file Riley's case history, 4 foster homes in 18 months. Multiple reports of behavioral issues, though Marcus suspected those issues were actually trauma responses. The most recent placement had ended when Riley ran. The foster father, Mr. Patterson, filed a missing persons report, Reeves said. He's concerned about Riley's safety. Marcus fought to keep his voice neutral. Riley told us why she left. Mr. Patterson was inappropriate with her. Reeves's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She told you that? Yes. Did she give specifics? Christine answered. He came into her room at night, made comments, touched her inappropriately. She reported it to her social worker and was told she was lying for attention. Reeves made notes. I'll investigate Mr. Patterson, but in the meantime, Riley needs proper placement. She has placement, Marcus said. Here. You're not an approved foster home. Then approve us. Reeves looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Morrison, I know your club does good work, but you're not exactly conventional guardians. Hell's Angels doesn't exactly scream stable home environment. We've helped dozens of kids over 40 years. You know this. You've worked with us. Helped, yes, but legal guardianship is different. There are requirements, background checks, home studies, court approval. Christine leaned forward. Then let's start the process. Whatever you need, we'll provide. But don't put Riley back in the system. She won't survive it. The word choice was deliberate, not won't tolerate it, but won't survive it. Because both Christine and Marcus understood that some kids had a breaking point and Riley was close to hers. Reeves was quiet, clearly wrestling with policy versus pragmatism. Finally, I'll need to interview Riley, alone, and I'll need to see where she's staying. They agreed. Reeves spoke with Riley for an hour while Marcus and Christine waited anxious. When the detective emerged, her expression was troubled. Riley confirmed what you said about Mr. Patterson. I'm opening an investigation immediately. As for her living situation, she paused. Against my better judgment, I'm going to allow her to stay here temporarily while we process your application for emergency foster placement. But Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Morrison, understand one problem, one hint that this isn't in Riley's best interest, and she's gone. Clear. Crystal clear, Marcus said. Thank you. After Reeves left, Riley emerged looking shell-shocked. Am I in trouble? No, Christine assured her, but we need to do this right. Legally, that means paperwork and visits and proving we can be proper guardians. You do that, actually become my foster parents, Marcus answered. If you'll let us. Riley's composure cracked. Tears came, those long-held tears she'd been suppressing for who knew how long. Christine held her while she cried, making soft, soothing sounds. Marcus stood helplessly nearby, reminded painfully of all the times he should have comforted his own children and hadn't. That night, lying in bed with Christine, Marcus stared at the ceiling. We're really doing this, taking in a teenage girl. We are. I destroyed my own kids. What makes you think I can do better this time? Christine rolled to face him. Because you're not that man anymore. You've had 37 years of sobriety, decades of therapy. You've helped hundreds of people. You're not the broken veteran who didn't know how to cope. You're Blackjack Morrison, and you're enough. Marcus wanted to believe her, wanted to think that redemption was possible, that second chances were real, that mistakes didn't have to be final. He'd spent 45 years trying to prove it through the club. Maybe this was his chance to prove it on a personal level. Riley deserved better than the hand she'd been dealt. So did Michael and Daniel decades ago. Marcus couldn't fix his son's childhoods. That ship had sailed and sunk. But maybe he could do right by one damaged kid. Maybe that was enough. Sleep came eventually, bringing dreams that were less nightmares and more memories. Not Vietnam this time, but Michael and Daniel as children. Before everything broke, when they'd still looked at him with trust instead of fear. In the dream, Marcus was given another chance. Could redo those critical moments. Could choose differently, be better, prove that fathers didn't have to destroy their children. He woke before dawn, Christine sleeping peacefully beside him. Through the window, he could see the light on in Riley's apartment. She was awake too, probably wrestling with her own demons. Marcus got up, made coffee, sat on the porch in his familiar spot. The sky lightened incrementally. Another day, another chance to do better than yesterday. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This isn't over, Daniel. Still watching, still angry, still carrying wounds that Marcus had inflicted. Marcus deleted the text and pocketed the phone. He couldn't fix his relationship with Daniel. 32 years had proven that. But he could be present for Riley, could give her stability and safety and the kind of fathering he wished he'd been capable of decades ago. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't atonement. It was just doing the next right thing one day at a time and hoping that eventually the weight would feel lighter. The sun cleared the mountains. Marcus finished his coffee and went inside to start breakfast. Christine would be up soon. Riley would need food. The club would require leadership. Life continued relentless and demanding. And Marcus Morrison, at 62 years old with trembling hands and decades of regret, was still standing, still trying, still believing that broken men could become builders, one careful choice at a time. Part 3, 3 weeks after the factory confrontation. Marcus woke to find Riley sitting on his porch at 4 in the morning. She'd wrapped herself in a blanket, steam rising from the mug in her hands, hot chocolate, he guessed, because she hadn't acquired a taste for coffee yet. She didn't acknowledge him when he stepped outside, just stared at the darkness like it held answers she couldn't quite decipher. He lowered himself into the chair beside her, his knee delivering its usual morning complaint. For several minutes, they sat in companionable silence. This had become routine, both of them unable to sleep past the early hours, both carrying nightmares that made rest feel like enemy territory. Riley spoke first, her voice barely disturbing the cold air. Christine told me you have sons, that they don't talk to you. Marcus had known this conversation would come eventually. Yeah. What happened? The question was simple. The answer wasn't. Marcus considered deflecting, offering some sanitized version that would preserve his dignity. But Riley deserved honesty. She'd seen enough lies from adults to recognize them instantly. I hit one of them, my oldest. He was 8, I was drunk and angry, and I backhanded him hard enough that he fell and cut his head open. Riley absorbed this without visible reaction. She'd probably witnessed worse in her 4 foster homes. And that's why they left. That's why their mother left with them. That's why the court gave custody to their aunt. That's why they haven't spoken to me in 32 years. Do you wish you could take it back? Every day, every single day. Riley sipped her hot chocolate. Marcus could see her processing, comparing his story to her own experiences, trying to map his failures onto the landscape of adults who'd failed her. Finally, she asked the question he'd been waiting for. Are you going to hit me? The directness gutted him. Not because the question was unfair. It was completely reasonable given his history and hers, but because it revealed how much courage it had taken her to stay. She'd heard about his violence and chosen to remain anyway, but the fear hadn't disappeared. It had just been temporarily suppressed. Marcus turned to face her fully. No, never. I'm sober 37 years. I've been in therapy for 3 decades. I learned what triggers me and how to manage them. But more than that, I learned that violence is a choice. I chose it before. I choose differently now. What if you get angry? I get angry plenty. Ask Christine, but anger doesn't require violence. That took me years to understand, but I understand it now. Riley seemed to weigh this. My 3rd foster dad used to say he couldn't help it, that his temper just got away from him. But I noticed he only lost his temper with people smaller than him. Never lost it with his boss or his friends, just me and his wife. The observation was astute. Violence was always selective, always calculated, even when it masqueraded as loss of control. Marcus had eventually realized the same thing about his own behavior. He'd never hit superior officers or veterans larger than himself. Only his wife and children, people who couldn't effectively fight back. Your foster dad is lying. Control is always possible. What varies is whether someone chooses to exercise it. That's what I thought. They fell silent again. Dawn was still an hour away, but the darkness had begun its subtle shift toward gray. Marcus thought about his own father, how that man's violence had shaped everything that came after. I never told my sons this story. He began surprising himself. But my father hit me too, regularly. Started when I was about 5 and continued until he died when I was 10. Riley's attention sharpened. This was clearly unexpected information. Marcus continued, the memories rising unbidden. Patrick Morrison, Irish immigrant factory worker, functional alcoholic. He came home angry every night and took it out on whoever was closest. Usually my mother, sometimes me. I learned early that you stayed quiet, stayed small, tried not to draw attention. The specifics came flooding back with painful clarity. His father's work boots heavy on the apartment stairs. The particular sound his belt made coming out of the loops. His mother's desperate attempts to redirect Patrick's rage. Young Marcus hiding in closets, under beds, anywhere that might provide temporary sanctuary. When I was 8, I tried to protect my mother, stepped between them during one of his rages. He backhanded me so hard I saw stars. Told me to stay out of grown folks' business. Riley's voice was quiet. What did you do? Learned that violence was how men solved problems. Learned that fathers were dangerous. Learned that protecting people you loved meant accepting pain. That's what your son Michael did, protected his brother. The parallel struck Marcus like a physical blow. He'd never explicitly connected those moments, his father hitting him hitting Michael, but Riley had seen it immediately. The cycle repeating, generation to generation, each damaged boy growing into a damaged man who created more damaged children. Yeah, Marcus said, his voice rough. Yeah, that's exactly what Michael did. And I responded the same way my father did. The same violence I'd sworn I'd never repeat. But you stopped. Your father didn't stop until he died. My father didn't have the option I had. No VA therapy, no PTSD diagnosis, no understanding that war breaks people in specific ways. He came back from Korea and just existed, broken and angry until his heart gave out at 42. Riley considered this. Do you think if he'd had help, he would have changed? I don't know, maybe. Or maybe some people are too broken. I'd like to think he would have tried. Is that why you started the club? To help broken people try? Marcus hadn't articulated it that way before, but Riley's assessment was accurate. Yeah, I guess it is. The sky continued its gradual brightening. Marcus could see Riley's face more clearly now, young, but already marked by experience eyes that had seen too much. She reminded him of himself at that age before Vietnam, when he'd still believed that surviving childhood meant escaping damage. Riley spoke again, her voice carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for 16 years. I used to think if I could just find the right family, everything would be okay. Like there was some perfect combination of people who would make me feel safe. But there isn't, is there? No perfect family. No, there isn't. So what do you do instead? Marcus thought about Christine, about the brothers in the club, about the imperfect but functional family they'd built from collective wreckage. You find people who are trying, who acknowledge their damage and work on it, who choose you repeatedly even when it's hard. Perfect doesn't exist, but trying does. Are you trying with your sons? I tried for years. Sent letters, made calls, showed up at places I thought they might be. Eventually, I realized my attempts were selfish. I was trying to assuage my own guilt, not respect their boundaries. So I stopped, left them alone, hoped that maybe someday they'd reach out if they wanted to. Did they? One of them did, sort of. Daniel called to threaten Christine. That was his way of reaching out with violence, same as I'd taught him. Riley processed this. And the other one, Michael. Silence. For 32 years, complete silence. The admission hurt in ways Marcus couldn't fully articulate. Daniel's anger was at least engagement. But Michael's silence was absolute rejection, a severing so complete it left no room for even hatred. He'd simply erased Marcus from his life as thoroughly as if his father had died. Riley's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then showed Marcus the screen. A text from an unknown number. Still thinking about you. Marcus's protective instincts flared immediately. Who's that? I don't know. Started getting them a few days ago. Why didn't you tell us? Didn't want to be more trouble than I already am. Marcus took the phone, scrolling through previous messages. They were vague but unsettling observations about where Riley had been, what she'd worn, suggestions that someone was watching. The most recent, from 2 hours ago. Pretty girl like you shouldn't be awake so early. Who's keeping you up? Cold fury settled in Marcus's chest. This was either Snake Rider surveillance or something worse. Either way, it meant Riley was actively being targeted. We need to tell Christine and Stone. Get your phone's location history pulled, trace these numbers. Will it help? Probably not. These guys know how to stay invisible. But we try anyway. They went inside. Christine was awake making breakfast. Her face went tight when Marcus showed her the messages. She immediately called Stone, who promised to come over with Hammer to discuss security protocols. By 7 a.m., the kitchen had transformed into a war room. Stone had Riley's phone, running it through software that would attempt to trace the messages. Hammer was coordinating with brothers who worked in telecommunications. Iron Horse arrived with a new phone for Riley, this one equipped with better security and tracking. Riley sat at the table looking overwhelmed and guilty. I'm sorry, I should have said something sooner. Christine's response was firm but kind. You're not responsible for someone stalking you. But from now on, anything weird happens, you tell us immediately. Understand? Yes, ma'am. The formal address made Christine smile despite the circumstances. You can call me Christine, or Chris. Ma'am makes me feel ancient. Stone looked up from the phone. Messages are routed through a VPN and disposable numbers. Professional setup. Whoever this is knows what they're doing. Marcus met Stone's eyes, both men thinking the same thing. Snake Riders. Daniel was escalating, moving from threats to active psychological warfare. Hammer spoke up. We increase Riley's security detail. She doesn't go anywhere without at least 2 brothers. School, home, anywhere. Full coverage. Riley's expression shifted to panic. I can't go to school with bikers following me. I'll look like I'm in witness protection or something. You're a 16-year-old girl being stalked, Iron Horse said gently. Looking unusual is better than being unsafe. The debate continued, Riley arguing for normalcy while the brothers insisted on protection. Eventually, they compromised unmarked cars for school runs, casual clothes instead of leather brothers who could pass as concerned relatives rather than obvious bodyguards. The phone rang. Marcus answered, expecting another club member. Instead, a voice he hadn't heard in 32 years came through the line. Dad, it's Michael. Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. Christine noticed immediately, moving closer. Stone and Hammer went alert, reading crisis in Marcus's sudden tension. Mike, his voice cracked on the name. Yeah, can you talk? Yes, I can talk. Michael's voice was careful, measured. I heard about what happened with Danny. The shooting. Is your wife okay? She's fine. How did you? I keep tabs on Danny. Have for years. Someone has to. The implication was clear. Michael had been monitoring his younger brother from a distance, maintaining connection without direct contact. It suggested concern that contradicted 32 years of silence. Marcus forced himself to breathe evenly. Where are you, Gam? Denver. I live here. Have for 15 years. Denver, 2 hours away. Michael had been that close and Marcus had never known. The knowledge was simultaneously comforting and devastating. Mike, please, I'm not calling for apologies or explanations. I'm calling because Danny is planning something bigger than a shooting. Marcus's professional instincts overrode his emotional reaction. What do you mean? He's not just targeting you or your wife. He's going after that girl, Riley. He thinks if he takes her, you'll finally understand what it felt like when we were taken from you. The threat crystallized into something concrete and terrible. Marcus looked at Riley sitting at his kitchen table eating cereal and felt primal protective rage. I don't know, soon. He's been obsessing about it, talking to his lieutenants about how to grab her without triggering a war with Hell's Angels. Why are you telling me this? Michael was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried complicated emotions. Because despite everything, I don't want Danny to become a kidnapper or a murderer. He's my brother, And you're still my father, even if I don't want you to be. The admission hung in the air raw and painful. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling decades of loss compress into a single moment. Can we meet, please? I just want to, oh, I don't think that's a good idea, Mike. But I'll keep you updated on Danny. If I learn anything specific, I'll call. Thank you. That means thank you. Take care of yourself, Dad. And protect that girl. She doesn't deserve to get caught in our family's mess. The line went dead. Marcus stood holding the silent phone, feeling like he'd been granted a glimpse of something precious before having it snatched away again. Michael had called, had shared information, had used the word dad. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement. After 32 years, it was something. Christine's hand found his shoulder. That was Michael. Yeah. What did he say? Marcus repeated the conversation. The room's energy shifted immediately from strategic planning to crisis response. If Daniel was planning a kidnapping, they needed to accelerate their timeline. Stone pulled out his phone. I'm calling in everyone. Full lockdown. Riley doesn't leave this house without a minimum of 4 brothers. Riley stood abruptly. Wait, no, I'm not going to be a prisoner. I ran away from foster care to not be controlled. I'm not trading one cage for another. Her voice held the edge of panic. Marcus understood for Riley freedom was survival. Restricting her movement even for her own safety would feel like every other time adults had exerted power over her without regard for her agency. Christine moved to Riley's side. Nobody's making you a prisoner, but we need to keep you safe. Can we find a middle ground? How if I can't go anywhere alone, that's a prison? Iron Horse spoke up, his tone carrying the authority of experience. Kid, I spent 6 months in a POW camp in Vietnam. I know what a prison looks like. This isn't it. This is family protecting family until a threat passes. What if the threat doesn't pass? Then we eliminate the threat. The bluntness was startling. Riley looked at Iron Horse, then at Marcus, then at the assembled brothers. You'd go to war over me. Your family, Marcus said simply. That's what we do. Riley's composure cracked. She sat back down heavily, overwhelmed by the weight of being valued. After a lifetime of being disposable, having people willing to fight for her was incomprehensible. The next hours were spent fortifying security. Brothers arrived in shifts, creating overlapping coverage. The house was swept for surveillance devices. New locks were installed. Escape routes were planned in case Daniel's assault came to their home. By evening, the transformation was complete. What had been a quiet ranch house now resembled a military installation. Riley retreated to her apartment, clearly struggling with the sudden loss of privacy and autonomy. Christine found Marcus in the garage working on the shovelhead despite his trembling hands. The motorcycle had developed new problems, carburetor issues this time, and the delicate work required steadiness Marcus no longer possessed. But he kept trying anyway, refusing to concede another piece of himself to age. She watched him struggle with a wrench for several moments before speaking. You need to let Stone help with that. I can do it. Your hands are shaking too much. You are going to strip the bolt. Marcus set down the wrench, defeated. Christine was right. She was usually right. He couldn't do the work anymore, couldn't maintain the machine that had been his companion for 45 years. Another loss in a lifetime of losses. Christine moved closer, her presence warm in the cold garage. Talk to me. About what? About how you're feeling, Michael called. Daniel's threatening Riley. Your hands won't stop shaking. Talk to me. Marcus looked at the shovel head, this machine he could no longer fix, and felt the metaphor slice through him. I'm falling apart, Chris. My body doesn't work right. My son hates me enough to kidnap a teenager. The other son called but won't see me. I'm building this family with Riley, but I destroyed my first family. What if I destroy this one too? You won't. How do you know? Because you're not that man anymore. How many times do I have to tell you before you believe it? Marcus wanted to believe, wanted to accept that redemption was real, that people could change, that the past didn't have to define the future. But belief required faith, and faith had always been difficult for him. Christine took his trembling hands in hers. These hands built a motorcycle club that's helped hundreds of people. They've raised thousands of dollars for charity. They've protected people who had nobody else. They shake now, but that doesn't erase what they've accomplished. They also hit my son 37 years ago, after which you got sober, got help, and spent 4 decades trying to be better. That matters, Marcus. Growth matters. Change matters. He wanted to argue, wanted to insist that some sins were unforgivable, but Christine's steady gaze wouldn't allow it. She'd been his anchor for 38 years, pulling him back from the edge repeatedly. If she believed in him, maybe that was enough. The sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. Both of them turned toward the house. More breaking glass, then a scream, Riley. Marcus ran despite his knees' protest, Christine right behind him. They burst through the back door into chaos. The kitchen window was broken smoke pouring in. Brothers were already responding, Hammer dragging Riley away from the smoke while Stone checked the perimeter. Through the haze, Marcus saw them, 4 figures in Snake Riders colors, motorcycles idling on the street. They'd thrown smoke bombs, creating confusion, testing defenses. One of them pointed directly at Riley, the gesture unmistakable. "We know where you are. We can get to you." Then they were gone, engines roaring into the night. The attack lasted maybe 30 seconds, long enough to deliver a message, short enough to avoid confrontation. Daniel was demonstrating that their security measures meant nothing, that he could reach Riley whenever he chose. Riley was shaking violently, her breath coming in gasps. Christine held her while Hammer checked for injuries. Stone was already on the phone coordinating response, calling in more brothers. Marcus stepped outside, surveying the damage. Broken windows dissipating the lingering smell of burning chemicals. And on the porch, spray painted in bright red, "You can't protect them all." The brothers gathered, anger radiating from them in waves. They wanted action, wanted retaliation, wanted blood. Marcus understood he wanted the same things, but rushing into violence would accomplish nothing except creating more casualties. Iron Horse voiced what others were thinking. "We have to move on Snake Riders, now, before they actually take Riley." "Agreed," Hammer added. "This was reconnaissance. Next time will be the real thing." Marcus looked at his assembled brothers, 20 men all ready for war, all waiting for his order. They would follow him anywhere, do anything he asked. That loyalty was both humbling and terrifying, but he couldn't ask them to go to war against his son. That burden was his alone. "No," he said quietly, "we're not doing that." Stone's expression hardened. "Black, they just attacked your home. Threatened Riley. What more do they need to do?" "I'm going to talk to Daniel again. Face to face. He'll kill you." "Maybe, but it's the only way to end this without a bloodbath." The brothers argued, trying to convince Marcus that diplomacy had failed, that violence was the only language Daniel understood. Marcus let them speak, understanding their frustration. Finally, Preacher intervened. "Brothers, let him try. If talking fails, we'll do what needs doing. But let him try." Reluctantly, they agreed. Marcus spent the next hour arranging another meeting. This time, Christine didn't argue about coming. She understood that this conversation needed to be father and son, without witnesses or buffers. The meeting was set for midnight at the same abandoned factory. Marcus prepared carefully, writing a letter to Christine in case he didn't return, leaving instructions for Riley's care settling accounts. At 11:30, he rode the shovelhead to the factory despite its mechanical problems. The bike coughed and sputtered, but carried him anyway. One last ride, possibly. One last chance. Daniel was waiting with 20 Snake Riders. Marcus had come alone. The imbalance was deliberate, Marcus demonstrating trust, Daniel demonstrating power. Father and son faced each other across the same empty space as before. But this time something was different. Daniel looked exhausted, not physically but emotionally. Like maintaining hatred for 32 years had finally become too heavy to carry. Marcus spoke first. "I'm sorry." "For what specifically?" "For hitting Michael. For scaring you both. For being drunk and angry and dangerous. For failing as a father in every measurable way. For not fighting harder to stay in your lives. For—" "Stop." Daniel's voice was rough. "Just stop." Marcus stopped. Daniel looked at his assembled brothers, then back at Marcus. "Do you know what's funny? I built this club to be everything Hell's Angels wasn't. More violent, more feared, more powerful. I thought if I could make you respect me through fear, it would mean something. Danny. But it didn't. None of it mattered, because the only thing I actually wanted was for you to be my dad again. And that's the one thing I couldn't force." The admission seemed to cost Daniel everything. His shoulders sagged, the aggressive posture deflating. Suddenly, he didn't look like a dangerous gang leader. He looked like a middle-aged man carrying a child's wound. Marcus took a careful step forward. I was your dad. I am your dad. I've been a terrible one, but that doesn't change the fact. What am I supposed to do with that? How am I supposed to process 32 years of abandonment followed by, I'm still your dad? I don't know, but we figure it out together, slowly, carefully, one conversation at a time. Daniel's laugh was bitter, but less corroded than before. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's probably the hardest thing either of us will ever do. But it's possible if you want it to be. What about her, Riley? You're just going to replace us with her? The question revealed the core wound. Daniel didn't just feel abandoned. He felt replaced. Every kid Marcus had helped was proof that Marcus was capable of fathering, which made his failure to father Daniel and Michael more painful. Riley isn't replacing anyone. She's a kid who needs help. Just like Michael, and you needed help 32 years ago and didn't get it from me. I can't undo my failures with you, but I can try to not fail her. So we're just supposed to watch you be the father to her that you never were to us. Marcus understood the trap. Any relationship with Riley would be interpreted as betrayal by his sons, but abandoning Riley to prove loyalty to Daniel would be its own betrayal, another failure to protect a vulnerable child. I don't have a good answer, Marcus admitted. I can't change the past, can't give you back your childhood, can't undo the damage. All I can do is try to be better now than I was then. For everyone, including you if you'll let me. Daniel was quiet for a long time. Around them, snake riders waited, reading their leader's indecision. Finally, Daniel spoke to his men. Wait outside. They hesitated. He insisted. Slowly, reluctantly, they left. Alone with his father, Daniel's composure fractured further. I don't know how to not hate you. Hating you has been my identity for so long. Then maybe stop trying to not hate me. Maybe just try to talk to me. Hatred and relationship aren't mutually exclusive. That's a therapist line. I've been in therapy 30 years. I've got lots of them. Daniel almost smiled, almost. This doesn't fix anything. I know. I'm still angry. I know. I might always be angry. I know, and I accept that. Daniel looked at his father with an expression that mixed longing and grief. What if I can't forgive you? Then we work with what we have. I don't need your forgiveness, Danny. I'd like it, but I don't need it. What I need is for you to stop threatening people I care about. Can you do that? And what do I get in return? A father who shows up, who tries, who acknowledges his failures and works to do better. It's not much, but it's what I have. Daniel sat down on a piece of old machinery, suddenly looking much older than 45. I'm tired, Dad. I'm tired of being angry, tired of running this club, tired of trying to hurt you. It doesn't make anything better. Marcus sat beside him, maintaining careful distance but sharing space. They sat in silence for several minutes. Not comfortable silence, but not hostile either. Just two damaged men existing in proximity, trying to figure out if connection was possible. Finally, Daniel spoke. I can't promise instant forgiveness. Can't promise I won't be angry sometimes. Can't promise this will work. I'm not asking for promises, just a chance. What does that look like practically? We talk occasionally, work up to more frequently if it feels okay. Maybe eventually you meet Christine properly. Maybe eventually you stop threatening to kidnap teenagers. Daniel had the grace to look ashamed. Yeah, I wasn't actually going to take Riley. Just wanted you to feel afraid. Mission accomplished. I have been terrified for weeks. Good. Daniel paused. No, not good. That's the hateful part of me talking. I don't actually want you to suffer. I just wanted you to feel something. I feel everything. I've felt everything for 32 years. They sat longer. Marcus's phone buzzed with messages from concerned brothers, but he ignored it. This moment was too fragile, too important to interrupt. Daniel eventually stood. I should go. It's a lot. Yeah. Can I call you if I want to talk? The question was so hesitant, so vulnerable that Marcus felt his throat tighten. Anytime, day or night, I'll answer. Don't expect it to be soon. I need time to process. Take all the time you need. Daniel nodded and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back. Dad, yeah, for what it's worth, I'm glad you got sober. Glad you got help. Glad you built something good out of the wreckage. Then he was gone. Marcus sat alone in the factory for another 30 minutes, letting the enormity of what had happened settle. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a crack in the wall, a possibility where none had existed before. He rode home slowly, the shovel head complaining, but functional. Brothers were waiting anxiously when he arrived. Their questions came rapid fire. Was he okay? What happened was Daniel backing off. Marcus gave them the abbreviated version. Daniel wasn't an active threat anymore. They'd talked. It was complicated but not dangerous. The brothers accepted this with visible relief. Riley had waited up sitting in the living room with Christine. When Marcus entered, she stood uncertainly. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. See, is Daniel going to... No, he's not going to hurt you. We talked. It's going to be a long process, but the immediate danger has passed. Riley nodded, processing. Then unexpectedly, she hugged him. Quick, awkward, but genuine. Thank you for protecting me. Marcus returned the embrace carefully. That's what family does. The following months established new patterns. Daniel didn't call immediately, true to his word. He needed time. But 6 weeks after their conversation, Marcus's phone rang at 2 a.m. Daniel's voice was hesitant. Can't sleep, thought I'd call. They talked for 20 minutes. Nothing profound, just surface conversation about motorcycles and weather and neutral topics. But it was contact. It was engagement. It was something. The calls became semi-regular. Once a month, maybe. Sometimes Daniel sounded angry. Sometimes fine. Sometimes almost friendly. Marcus learned to accept whatever Daniel brought to the conversation, to not demand more than his son could give. Riley thrived under Marcus and Christine's guardianship. The formal adoption process moved forward, complicated but progressing. She enrolled in school, made cautious friendships, began therapy to address her trauma. Slowly, carefully, she learned that stability could be real. 2 years after the factory shooting, Marcus turned 64. The club threw a party low-key by their standards, just the core brotherhood and close friends. Riley, now 18 and legally adopted, helped Christine organize everything. Michael sent a card, not a long message, just, "Happy birthday, Dad. Maybe we can talk soon. Sean M." It was the first direct contact in 34 years. Marcus held the card like it was made of glass, reading the 6 words repeatedly, finding hope in their careful phrasing. Maybe we can talk soon wasn't a commitment, but it was possibility. Daniel showed up unexpectedly. He walked into the clubhouse carrying a wrapped package, looking uncomfortable, but determined. The room went quiet. Everyone knew the history, knew the significance of this appearance. Marcus met him halfway across the room. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Daniel held out the package. "Happy birthday. It's, probably stupid." Marcus unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a photograph, the same one Marcus kept on his mantle of him, with 8-year-old Michael and 5-year-old Daniel, but restored and enlarged. Someone had professionally removed the damage from the original print, enhanced the colors, made it look almost new. On the back, in Daniel's handwriting, "Forgiveness takes time, but I'm trying, D." Marcus couldn't speak. Just held the photo and nodded. Daniel nodded back. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, then Daniel turned to leave. Riley intercepted him at the door. She'd never met Daniel, but she knew who he was. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for giving him a chance." Daniel looked at this teenage girl who'd unknowingly been part of his conflict with his father. "You're Riley." "Yeah. He talks about you, says you're smart, brave. He talks about you too, says you're his son and he loves you." Daniel's expression flickered. "Yeah, working on believing that. It's true, I can tell. I've lived with people who didn't love me. This is different." Daniel studied her, then nodded. "Take care of him. He's old and his hands shake." "I will." Daniel left. The party resumed, but with an undercurrent of hope that hadn't existed before. Marcus held the restored photograph, feeling something uncurl in his chest that had been clenched for decades. Preacher approached, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "That was good. That was really good." "Yeah. The long road, you're walking it. We all are." Christine appeared with cake. Riley helped serve it. Stone and Hammer argued about motorcycle maintenance. Iron Horse told a story about Vietnam that everyone had heard before but still laughed at. The evening unfolded with the easy rhythm of family. Later, sitting on his porch in the familiar pre-dawn darkness, Marcus reflected on legacy. He'd asked the question years ago, what do we leave behind? He still didn't have a complete answer. But he knew this much. His legacy was complicated. He'd destroyed one family and built another. He'd hurt his children and spent decades trying to heal others. He'd failed catastrophically and succeeded modestly. He'd been a terrible father and might yet become an adequate one. The scales would never balance. Some damage couldn't be repaired. But Marcus was learning that redemption wasn't about achieving perfection. It was about showing up day after day and trying to do marginally better than yesterday. Daniel was trying, Michael was considering trying, Riley had been saved. Christine still believed in him. The club still stood. His hands still shook, but they could still hold photographs, could still answer phones when his sons called, could still help when help was needed. At 64, Marcus Morrison was still broken, still carried Vietnam in his nightmares and guilt in his waking hours, still missed the steadiness his body once had, still wished he could rewrite history. But he was also standing, still breathing, still capable of love and being loved, still building one careful choice at a time. The sun cleared the mountains, painting everything gold. Marcus finished his coffee and went inside to make breakfast. Christine would wake soon. Riley would emerge from her apartment. Another day stretched ahead, full of possibility and challenge in equal measure. The long road continued, and Marcus walked it step by imperfect step towards something that looked almost like peace.